this gum still good if it's been sitting here for over
Whoa,
a year?
how'd you sneak in here?
Oh, I think that's. Let us know.
All right, welcome everyone. It is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, and we are gathered here in the City Hall chambers for the first time in nearly a year and a half for our regularly planned agenda-setting session. And we have one special called session item for which, prior to this, Commission have amended the agenda so that we may extend the emergency ordinance. There are going to be several opportunities for public input. There'll be opportunity for public input on the single item on our special called session, and then there will be public input on the consent, old and new business. So, Attorney Drake, I believe we have one item on our special called session. Could you read that ordinance for us?
Yes, an ordinance for the 19th declaration of a local state of emergency related to COVID-19 and for other purposes.
All right, thanks, Attorney Drake. And so what this item does is just extend our existing emergency ordinance to the first Wednesday in August. And so there is the prospect of some amendments that we could approve at the first Tuesday meeting, business meeting in August. But this just keeps status quo going, so.
Motion to approve.
All right, I've got a motion to approve from Commissioner Hamby. I have a second from Commissioner Myers. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, and we're going to extend our current emergency ordinance through the first Wednesday in August. Do I hear a motion to exit special called session?
So moved. Second?
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Hool and a second from Commissioner Parker to end our special called session. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, now is the time when we are accepting public input on any of the consent agenda items on our agenda. Those are items number 1 through 15. So now is the time for public input on any item 1 through 15. Come on up, please state your name and your city of residence. Crickets from City Hall tonight. Crickets. All right. Would any commissioner like to remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion? I'm going to recognize Commissioner Link.
Number 3, please. Oh, actually, and number 10 as well.
All right. All right. Commissioner Wright.
Number 1.
Commissioner Hool.
5 and 7, please.
Any other item?
Could I add 9 to that?
You may.
And did Commissioner Link already say 15? I wasn't sure on that.
She did not.
Okay, 15 as well. Question.
15 and 9. Commissioner Myers. Going once.
Could I have item number 8 removed, please?
All right. Number 8, Commissioner Parker. All right. We'll go ahead and dispense with consent agenda first. All right. So item number 1, Commissioner Wright, you were interested in having removed.
Well, yes, I wanted to apologize to staff because in the history, apparently I didn't respond in February when there was my work request. They wanted some more information. So I want to apologize for staff with that. And I wanted it off consent so that I can use the time between now and August to clarify what I clearly didn't respond to and the solutions between the two offerings there.
Okay, so we're going to keep that off consent, number 1. Any further comment on the parking prohibition on Morton Avenue, item 1? All right, we're going to move on to item 3, Commissioner Link.
Yeah, this is a proposal for an all-way stop sign on Boulevard at Hiawassee Avenue. I was not aware this was coming, even though I live like literally a block away. I know that I at some point or another, I'd alerted about some site issues because there's some parking that's inhibiting the site for cars coming down the hill. And there is a lot of activity there because you've got the White Tiger Restaurant. So I'm glad to see this on the agenda. One thing that I was made aware of today is Boulevard had recently had new speed limit signs, or at least the east end, new speed limit signs that reduced the speed limit to 25. And then all of a sudden, it was back up to 30. And I'm wondering if staff could explain what's going on with that.
So is that something, System Manager Jones or Edwards, that we could get from TPW?
Okay. I mean,
Thanks, Commissioner. Like, we can look into that and get back
yeah,
to you.
I mean, I think that it might have something to do with the radar permit, and, I'm wondering if maybe we could do a traffic analysis after these traffic calming, 'cause the speed bumps are coming up too. If we could do a traffic analysis down the line after these things are implemented, and then maybe go back to the 25.
Okay, we can look into that.
Okay, thank you.
And regarding the four-way stop, can we move that back to consent?
Yes, we can move that back to consent. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Hool, item number 5, the ordinance amendment regarding the fee for special event permit.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to get clarity. Would this apply to people who are applying for a permit to march or hold a rally? Because those usually happen in well under 60 days' notice, so.
So technically, anything related to freedom of speech, you wouldn't need a permit. So if that's what you're alluding to, I think the answer would be no.
Okay.
Sometimes applicants who are organizing those do come in and fill out a permit, but technically they don't have to. So in theory, it could, but that conversation could be had when they come in.
Okay, so if someone, because I do know a number of organizers in town do want to come in and apply for a permit for those situations, are we saying that if they don't do that in 60 days or more notice, that they might get hit with this $150 price tag now?
That's what we're recommending in the agenda item. I think for staff, it takes about 60 days to work on these permits as part of the typical work cycle. And so anything that comes in under that 60 days, it is kind of a drop everything and work on it. So there is that being pulled away from the current work. So all we're trying to do is when it's possible to get more notice than 60 days to really encourage folks to do that. If it's something that can't be done, then that's understandable. But in many instances, there's opportunity to know in advance of the 60 days, and we're just trying to encourage folks to do that so it doesn't impact our work.
Okay. I mean, I guess because folks in a, First Amendment situation have the ability to do it anyway, and we want to encourage them to do this so they can coordinate with the county staff when applicable, is there a way to build in a provision that for circumstances like that, we would continue to not charge the $150 fee, even though it would apply to things that are, large musical events and things like that?
So in facts and issues number 2, we do talk about how the permit's not required for public rallies and marches. I don't know if that addresses your concern.
Okay. So basically, if they're choosing to apply for it in less than 60 days' notice, you would just say, like, actually, you don't need it. Okay. I'd like to keep this off consent just to have a little more time with it, but it makes sense what I'm hearing right now.
Great. Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've pulled up this thing many times back whenever I was applying for permits, and it does say in our code right now, 6523, and as long as this isn't altered, that it says, and I quote, any such person, group, organization applying for demonstration or protest shall be exempt from the permit requirement in section 652 and the fees set forth in section 653C and 6, and it goes on to say all the. So as long as that's kept in place, I would imagine that all fees would be waived. That's already in our code.
Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, I had a different question that I sent you earlier, but I'll just share it here and see if you have a response yet. I guess in the agenda report, you mentioned that there were more and more of these last-minute requests going on, and I was just wondering a little bit more about that, if those, what kind of, some examples, or how long has this higher rate of last-minute requests been going on? Is this just a post-COVID thing?
We have seen this historically, but I think to your question, Commissioner Myers, there does seem to be a jump post-COVID, and I think it's probably, people are excited to have events again and interested in doing things. I think the types of events run the gamut. One example was the Forest Heights Blueberry Festival. There was a pop-up concert. I think it was the Finley pop-up concert that we've had. The John Lewis Motorcade. There's a number of examples. And all these are examples of things that we're excited to see occurring in our community. So, we want these events to happen, and we're excited about all of them. We're just trying to encourage as many as possible to let us know more than 60 days in advance. But we understand not everybody can, and things come up.
So are we going to, I don't know, make some big announcement on the website or get this out so that people are aware of this increased fee? Because what was it previously? It was, a $10 late fee or something or other?
Well, there really isn't. It's $25 right now.
Right.
So this would be a significant change. So
Yeah.
we will make sure there's plenty of notice and people have heard about it. And we've even talked about, giving exception for the first time and just letting people know. So I think there's a lot we can do, and we don't want this to be punitive by any means.
That would be great. Thank you.
All right, we will leave that off consent. All right, we're going to move on to item number 7, transfer of 12 mobile data terminals to the Watkinsville Police Department. Commissioner Hu will ask for this beyond discussion.
Yeah, thanks. I was just, it struck me as odd that we're just gifting them. And I was curious if you could elaborate on why we didn't seek some kind of payment for the value of these as opposed to just gifting them.
This is something we've done historically with old equipment. These are well beyond their age of useful life. They've transitioned, I think, on average, if I'm remembering correctly, they're beyond 9 years of age. We're tending to replace these after 5 years. There's probably not a ton of value in these, and there's a need, and so when we have items like this, it's typical for people to request it and us to say yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy with it staying on consent for now.
Okay.
but
All
If I
right,
have further questions, I can email.
move that to consent. All right, item number 8 is the Downtown Development Authority Community Events Program funding request for FY22. We always, in the budget cycle, create a block of funding, and then the DDA comes back with a specific event. So Commissioner Parker, you asked for this to be on discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In reading the agenda item, it is, it does spell out particularly under facts and issues number 2, that unexpended CEP funds lapse at the end of each fiscal year. And I know that last year, we had approved a CDO to increase the funding for certain events in alignment with our Black Lives Matter resolution, but a number of those events were unable to happen because of the pandemic. I was wondering what happens to the funding from previous years when unexpended? In this case, does it just get reabsorbed into the general fund, or?
I'm sorry, Josh, I will say this. I know and Kelly and I serve, or Mayor, I'm sorry. Mayor and I serve on the authority, and this year we did allocate those funds to Twilight and to Athfest and to some of the others on there. So for this year, they have received what we allocated for them last year.
Okay.
So this, and this will be in addition to what they've already received this year.
Okay, and so when you say some of the others on there, do you happen to, or could I get a list of, the breakdown of what their total funding levels are for FY22?
Definitely,
In the
Commissioner Parker.
in the final version of this agenda item, that'd be really helpful. And.
To answer your first
Yeah.
question too, Commissioner Parker, it goes, if it wasn't spent, it would go to fund balance in the hotel, motel tax special
Gotcha.
revenue fund, so it is in there.
And Commissioner Parker, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're asking for is FY21, what we gave in FY21 and 22s.
Yeah.
Because some of these received money after January of this year.
Sure, yeah, I was looking through my email and saw some communications with the folks at Twilight and Athfest, particularly about that issue, but wasn't sure how many of those organizations that had extended to.
Right.
And so, I think last year also, I asked to see the requested amounts as well, if we could get that information between now and the voting meeting as well. I just want to know what these different organizations asked for as compared to what they were funded at, and also, what the rollover from last year then does for their total level of funding. Since it's going to be a big year, people are gonna be excited to be back out, so I just want to make sure they have enough money to have a good time.
And I will say this too, if you don't mind, Mayor, that was part of our discussion during CEP, because everybody asked for a lot of money this
Sure,
year.
yeah, they're trying to blow it out this year.
And we were making the point in the Downtown Development Authority that if there ever was a year to get some private donations for an event you're trying to put on downtown, then this would be that year, just because simply people are excited and want to be
Yeah.
back in town. So there's certainly a big opportunity for for doing our part, but also, also encouraging the organizations to also look beyond us and try to increase their private donations as well,
Yeah, and then,
or private sponsorships, I guess.
for sure, yeah. And so I'm assuming this, a list in the attachment is just the organizations that were funded at all. There may have been some organizations that requested funding but were not granted, or were not recommended for any funding.
I kind of think we tried to give everybody a
My
little
memory
Everybody
is
got
that
some?
everybody who requested funds got some funds.
Okay. And how generally are those organizations solicited?
I'm sorry.
So how, ordinarily, what is the process by which, like, there's outreach for organizations to apply for that funding?
We send out, Downtown Development Authority has a list that they send out, and organizations, are constantly, and I think, they're always trying to help with these last-minute organizations too. So, Mayor, if you want to
Yeah,
add
so,
to that, I mean.
and we have seen new organizations roll on in the last several years. So Hot Corner Festival is a relatively new entity that's rolled on in the last few years. The Chautauqua is a
Yeah.
very new one, just in the last couple of years. And of course, it does have to be in the downtown zone.
Yeah.
Because it has to be in the ADDA district that stretches essentially from the river to Finley Street. But we have seen some consistent enticement and from engagement with both the board and the directors. They're very interested in new events.
Yeah.
And have done a lot of solicitation. And what I'll say is that a lot of those who've been involved in other downtown activities, whether those were public art activities or business enhancement activities, have sometimes also been tied to special events. So I think that informal engagement with the Downtown Development Authority has generated some new things.
Okay, yeah. I was just curious because, again, coming back to the Black Lives Matter resolution, one of our resolves was to support community events like the MLK Parade, which is on here, the Hot Corner Festival, which is on here. We don't currently have a Juneteenth celebration downtown. I mean, we have really great ones in neighborhoods where, they are organic. But I was just thinking ahead towards perhaps next year, trying to get an organization to put forward a request to maybe have something that's more centrally located. Though I'm stoked that these organizations that are, or have been doing these other celebrations for years are getting the support it seems like they need.
Well, and I will add to that, if you don't mind, just real quick, Mayor, that the Downtown Development Authority, if an event like that comes forward, then certainly we'd welcome the opportunity to partner with
Yeah.
somebody on doing that. And as a matter of fact, one of the things, I'll just put a plug in, one of the things that we do on the Downtown Development Authority, in addition to looking for new events that we would fund out of our own thing, is, to help them get some of this CEP money to,
Yeah.
at the next go-round. But also, we do this experience downtown. So I know on several occasions, they've reached out to different Boys and Girls Club, comes downtown, and we I think in the past, we've taken them to Cine to see a movie and bought pizza and stuff like that. So if you know of a group like that would benefit from
Sure,
experiencing
yeah,
that, then
definitely.
we
Yeah,
would
definitely
be-
something to look ahead to
we would welcome.
2023 for.
Sure.
But yeah, that information on the requests and then the total funding levels would be really helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner,
That's
you
all.
leave this off consent?
If I could get, can I get an update to the agenda item and still have, and then have that put on consent?
Just a.
Just to reflect some of that history
just a
Commissioner
history
Hamby brought
item.
up about what happened to the
Shifting
funds from last year.
From FY '21?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
As-
cool.
As
That'd be
agenda
great.
setter, glad to do that.
All right, let's do it.
All right, moving on. Item number 9 regards the water and wastewater connection fees for the Athens Land Trust at 853 Reese Street, and as embodied in the agenda item, this pursues a policy that the commission just enacted in the last 2 years regarding the ability to waive fees for environmental purposes or provision of significant affordable housing. Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, and I'm just following up and wanted to get before the voting meeting, like a list of exemptions, other exemptions that were approved over the last couple of years, just so I could sort of fill myself in, that allow the waiving of the water and wastewater connection fees, just so I could see where this is fitting in the community.
And Commissioner Myers, just in terms of history, this is the first affordable housing waiver.
Oh.
We have done an environmental waiver previously.
Okay, so this is the second exemption.
second or maybe third.
Okay, so that'll be an easy list to get then.
And this,
Commissioner Hamby?
and we passed this a few years ago, if I remember correctly, and I was glad we did at the time, because this is, you know, if we're looking at affordable housing, this is certainly a significant savings for those in the affordable housing arena.
Absolutely. I mean, this is $17,000 the Land Trust will be able to funnel into another affordable housing project that they don't have to commit to this. Exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Commissioner Parker?
Thank you. This came up on the inclusionary zoning working group recently with regards to usage of, you know, these exemptions as a mechanism for incentivizing affordable housing. But it ultimately it's money that may be accounted for in the budget elsewhere. I was just wondering how we go about, you know, sort of making that wiggle room when we're thinking about funding levels for relevant department, or, you know, so for example, like we couldn't, you know, if we did like $1 million worth of exemptions, that would impact the department a little bit. And so I'm just curious, like how we account for any, like, how should I say this? You know what I'm saying?
Any funds we don't receive
Sure,
because of this
yes,
policy.
yeah.
And of course, this is our largest enterprise fund,
Yeah.
the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. General fund is not touched here. And of course, it's a very large department. I don't know if you want
With
to
the large.
talk about that a little bit more.
I think in general, there's a difference between, you know, our enterprise and public utilities and what we would think about in terms of planning fees and inspection
Yeah.
fees. So because we know we're going to be receiving water and sewer usage fees later, this is a little easier to do. And we also know there's not going to be a ton of these. So there's not a mechanism in the public utilities budget to account for lost fees like this. It's a revenue of total fees. And we're saying, hey, we understand we're not going to receive these fees, but we know long-term it's for the good, and they're going to be paying customers here too. So I think it's a balance, but there's not a line item that says, you know,
Do we
it's
expect
accounting for
this
this.
much, you know, a year or anything like that? It's not a tool we use a lot now, but it's one that's been discussed, like, oh, it'd be great if we use that more. It's like, well, we might need to think about how it could impact the enterprise fund if we were to take this route increasingly.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So down the road, if we are doing more and more of this, maybe there's
Yeah.
a conversation there. Good point, Commissioner Parker.
Okay.
Everybody okay with this going back on consent? All right. All right. Item 10, Commissioner Link, you asked for discussion of, which is the request for exception to the water and sewer connection policy at 197 and 199 North Rocksprings. And for the public, we have an exception policy, which is that if a parcel is one parcel away from the public road, and so you have to cross a private parcel to another private parcel, that has to come in front of the commission.
Yeah, so this property has come up before. These are two little shotgun houses behind some small homes on Rock Springs. There was a shared driveway between the two homes that were fronting Rock Springs. One of the properties was purchased by a student housing developer, took away the driveway access for the family living in the next door home. And now it appears that same developer has purchased the two lots that had the vacant shotgun homes and had proposed to redevelop those properties. The shotgun homes take up pretty much the entire footprint of the lots. It's far substandard lot. And the previous ordinance allowed for development of up to 3 bedrooms by right. We did change that ordinance to make it no more than 2 on these substandard lots. I'm not sure if the paperwork was filed before or after that ordinance. I'm kind of reluctant to, allow this to go forward free and clear, knowing that, up to 6 student bedrooms can be developed in the backyard of these tiny little shotgun homes or tiny little cottages where there is no available parking. This family has the potential to have basically their entire backyard filled up with student parking and student housing. So I just want to get more from the planning department about plans that have been filed for the actual redevelopment of these properties and what we're looking at as the final outcome for this project.
Do you want to leave this off consent?
Yeah,
And what you're looking for is whether plans review have been examined for this?
yeah, yeah.
All right. All right, I'm going to move on. Commissioner Myers, you requested that we discuss item 15, which is the project concept for SPLOST 2020, Project 27, which is the work plan for facilities and system replacement.
Yeah, first, I just wanted to thank staff for incorporating the updated sustainable building policy comments into the facts and issues section. I appreciate that. And I was just curious, I was looking through the expenses, and I was noticing how expensive the roof was on the Welcome Center at $191,000, and I was wondering if you could address that. I did read later on somewhere in the report about being solar ready, but it seemed like a very high cost roof.
All right, good question, Commissioner Myers, and we'll provide more information kind of in the follow-up report, but there's 3 structures on that site, and due to the age, we're having to hire an architect and engineer to consult on that overall approach. And so we use a third-party consultant to estimate the costs on those 3 structures, and we're taking everything off and replacing, and it's not just, your typical shingles. So we'll provide even more detail beyond that, but that's the general answer. So 191 is the price we were estimated for, and it has to do with the complexity, the number of buildings there, and the type of shingle.
Thank you.
Do you want to leave that off consent?
We can put it back onto
All right.
consent.
Christina, 15 back on consent.
Mayor, I had a.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Denson.
Not on 15, actually, and I apologize for this, but I was just trying to read something here. On number 9, actually, on the water and wastewater connection fees, I actually would like to leave this off consent and put a request to staff, actually. My concern here is I completely support this. My concern is that this has never been taken advantage of before. And so I'm wondering about some of the effectiveness, or at least the outreach that we have, because it's not being taken advantage of. And my conversations with developers is that they don't know about how to take advantage of this thing, and that's one of the reasons it's been there. So I'd love to have, maybe as on our report, a little bit of a clear process about how people apply for this and how we could possibly make it more accessible.
All right, we are going to move on to old and new business, and so we have another opportunity for resident input. And so if anyone would like to speak to old and new business, which are items 16 through 39, now is that time. You may come to the podium and note your name and place of residence. Good evening.
So, where to start?
Your name and place of residence for the record, please.
Well, that's a good place to start. My name is Susan Monteverdi, and you need my address?
You can either give your address or just your city of residence.
Oh, I live in Athens. So, where to start? I'm speaking with regard to agenda item number 30, which is a discussion on the homeless encampment project. And I remember from the last meeting that you were going to decide what kind of location where you wanted it by this date, which is July 20th, 2021. So I don't know if you've discussed that or if that's what the agenda item is today, but that's why I'm here. And so previously, I contacted the city and asked for any research and white paper on the subject matter, and I was told that there is none, and to contact a specific commissioner to gain any information on it. I didn't do that, but I did do a little bit of research on my own, and I came up with about 8 or 9 pages for you all, and I've given you context here of all the pages here. And so what I've done, I've used a lot of probably of some of the research that you've used yourselves in terms of coming up with a proposal, but I'd still like to see your research as well, besides just my own. So anyway, I put it together. I've talked about the scope of the proposal. I've given statistics on the homeless situation here in Athens. I'm talking about the current services that are currently available in Athens right now. I used Seattle as an example to look at the cost and operation of homeless encampments in general, and to use that to possibly scale for Athens-Clarke County. So there's that aspect of it in these pages that I've given you. I've also, on the back page, there's about 6 questions that I've entered and with bullet points. And I'm hoping that the commission will be able to answer some of these questions in detail in writing, because we have a lot of residents here in Athens who are very concerned about this aspect of the community. And we'd like to have an honest discussion with the commission on how to move forward. So I have the questions, so if you could possibly give us answers in writing or whatever, that would be great. And I'm also thinking that before you move forward on any further votes, maybe even next month, if you move to a vote to say we want to have this location for a homeless encampment, that you have town halls with people so that they can have their own participation and their own input, and we can pass ideas back and forth and look at numbers and look at scalability, look at the cost, so forth and so on. So it's all in here, and I'm not going to spend 30 minutes going through it with you because I know you don't want to do that. So please feel free to read it. I think each of you have a copy of it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or give you my input on the situation. We spent 30 years in Northern California, so we're very familiar with every aspect of this. So,
Great, and the attorney has the material, so we'll
Yes.
distribute those to the commission. Thank you, Susan. I
all right?
appreciate that.
Okay. When can I get commitment from the commission on terms of maybe a town hall for people to be involved in and participate?
We don't
and/or
engage-
having my questions answered?
We take input now, and then during discussion of the agenda items,
Okay.
we'll have discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Any further public input?
I think this is a record. Hi, I'm Alan. There's my information. I'm not going to give my address because, as it stands as a gay man in Athens, I'm not protected from discrimination in my employment, my rights to services, or my housing. And as most of y'all know, last time I spoke, someone who disagreed with my opinions at the meeting drove over to my house in his big old pickup truck to let me know that my opinions were not ones he appreciated. So, and that was just about a kayak launch. So this is a little bit bigger. But I am so glad to see the non-discrimination ordinance moving forward. It can't move fast enough. It's a big deal for the more marginalized communities in Athens. But I'd like to ask for one more thing. If I understand it currently correctly, investigation of discrimination complaints tied to this ordinance will be conducted by the complainant filling out a form and submitting it to, currently, Judge Hope for review and investigation. I would imagine that many would find it a bit uncomfortable to have to petition a non-marginalized government judge. Many cities that have put together progressive non-discrimination ordinances also have a civil or human rights committee or commission containing a mix of citizens and government members, including a judge or lawyer, to hear the plaintiff's case and investigate. Such a commission often also educates the community on issues of diversity and inclusion, advises city leaders, recommends policies and strategies to make the city more inclusive. I've spoken with Kelly and Tim and Mike and Allison and Mariah and a little bit with Carol and Patrick and Melissa. I'm not trying to slight you, but we just haven't had a chance to talk about some of these things, and Rita. And every one of you seems to be supportive of this concept. So I'd hope that you all would make a formal declaration of intent to create such a group in Athens. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Any further public input tonight on old and new business? All right, hearing none, we are going to move on to old business first. Item 16 is the parking prohibition in Falling Shoals to allow emergency vehicle access. Commissioner Davenport, give you first opportunity if there's anything else you want to contribute about this.
Yeah, can we leave this off the consent? I'm waiting to hear back from the residents.
Certainly.
But it looks like we'll be hopefully ready to vote in August.
All right, thank you. Any further input? All right, move on to item 17. This is a temporary pilot closure of Pope Street, much like we've seen on a couple blocks away between the Bottle Works and the Grit Building. Commissioner Denson.
It's in Commissioner Link.
Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a no-brainer to me. My only question is, why did it take so long? It appears the request came from the adjacent business/property on January 6th. It's now July 20th. I'm just curious as to why it took so long for this to come before us.
I don't know the answer to that, Commissioner Link, but we could definitely ask and figure that out.
Yeah, I am interested, because I know it did take a long time for us to get our parklet program running, and these are the kind of things that definitely make for a more vibrant community, and, you know, that their request came through, you know, to help provide more seating area during the pandemic. Well, you know, that's on the wane, hopefully. So I'd just like to see us have, you know, a more speeded up process for these kind of requests.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Denson and then Commissioner Hamby.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would also like to see that too, because I know that Commissioner Link and I, back in January, were first talked to the applicant asking for this. So, but yeah, I think this is a great point. And just for the public looking up in our data, I don't know if everybody else saw this, that said that those 95 cars seen coming down the road when they did this evaluation, 15 of those cars were going the wrong way. So already showing that this is there's a bit of a danger there anyways, and also even the direction that the traffic does head makes it very, very difficult and somewhat dangerous to even turn left out of that street on Pope when you're trying to turn on the Prince. So I think this is a great move, and I hope that it becomes permanent.
Commissioner Hamby.
Sure. I guess I'm wondering why don't we just vote to make it permanent? Is there a reason why we couldn't just go ahead and start that process? I know you need a kind of public process for that, but I mean, why not? In the same, just hit that one and what's the other one down the street where Taziki's is, Newton? Just do them both permanent at the same time.
System Manager Edwards.
Right. Good point, Commissioner Hamby. I think one thing we're thinking as staff is the 90-day closure will allow us to try it out. I know Solid Waste wants to see how it works and how it affects their routes. And then we'll be able to ask everybody that lives in that area how they were impacted, the business owners and the residents. And so it does give that feedback loop. So that's why we're recommending the 90 days, but understand if y'all want to move forward with something different.
But correct me if I'm wrong though, but I do believe if we do have a street closure though, we have to go through that process anyway. So what I'm suggesting is start that process and then have it closed permanently. Because what will end up happening is we'll close it temporarily and then come back to us, and then it just drags it out longer.
And in terms of choose your own adventure here, so one prospect is that it remains in the public right-of-way, but it's not for vehicular traffic, and the other would be that you're actually giving up a public right-of-way. So I think that's the process that you're referencing, where you actually have to go through that three-step, multiple meeting process. So that's not what we're talking about here. It's just, it's just converting it to simply pedestrian and bike right-of-way, but not vehicular.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I would recommend putting on consent.
Okay. Everybody okay with that to consent? All right. 17 to consent. Thanks, everyone. All right. Number 18 is a Sidewalk Cafe Ordinance Amendment. And this simply creates a new class of business as is described here. So there are some kind of places where you can actually get food to eat, but they are not a restaurant or a bar, and so not currently available for the Sidewalk Cafe. So a chocolatier, a donut shop now would be able to get that Sidewalk Cafe.
Motion to approve.
Everybody cool with that, the consent?
Yes.
All right. 18, consent. All right. Number 19 is the Upper North Oconee Interceptor Project Phase 2C award of contract, and this is simply a long-planned expansion of a sewer line in the Newton Bridge corridor.
Consent.
Consent? We are winning tonight, Madam Clerk.
You spoke too soon.
All right, item 20. This is on here in the public agenda by title only. And staff has just finalized the agenda report, which I believe should be at your place. This is simply some new technology infrastructure so that we can avoid the kind of problem that we had earlier this year when we had the server challenge. So, any questions about this generically? I know you just got the document in front of you.
Can we put it on consent?
Everybody okay with that on consent? Okay?
Mayor,
Yes.
we're all looking at the document, but could you, for the listening audience, just give them a summary of it?
Assistant Manager Edwards, would you mind doing that?
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Thornton. Last year, we had some hardware break, and you know, when you read the agenda item, they're called nodes, and basically, they're servers for servers. So they're, you know, if you think of an orchestra and you think of a conductor, these are the servers that are conducting all of our servers. We have, I think, about 150 that are working and trying to make the best use of them and use them efficiently. And so all of our applications for all our departments are on these servers. And so if you have some of these nodes stop working, all our applications stop working. And so we experienced that last year when a few of these failed. And so we're looking to purchase 4 new ones to replace some of those that failed, and we've been renting to kind of stand up our infrastructure. So these will replace those ones and we won't have to rent replacements anymore. And so we'll be back and everything will be running smoothly.
Consent?
Everybody okay with consent?
Consent.
All right, excellent. Appreciate it all. All right, item 21 regards expenditure of some SPLOST dollars from 2011 on speed tables on Boulevard, and this is in Commissioner Link's district.
Yes, this has been like 2.5 years at least in the making. Yeah, I'm super excited to see this, and I want to thank staff for all the hard work they did working with the residents in Boulevard. It hasn't been all that easy during the pandemic, and I'm glad to see that there is a 4th speed table planned for the farthest east end. I know initial conversations didn't include that, but I feel like that's really important. I mean, I've been literally passed at least twice on that portion of Boulevard. You know, it's a straightaway shot. There's not a whole lot of people parking on street, so I'm really glad to see this go forward, and this is another area where hopefully we can get the speeds to naturally reduce and get that speed limit back to 25. And I'm just a big fan of traffic calming in general. I'd like to initiate a conversation about getting some 15-mile-per-hour speed limits in some of our residential neighborhoods.
All right, any further input on this?
I do have a question. And it's just a clarification. We did just go through the neighborhood traffic management program that came out of LRC and was approved. And so I've been learning the different types of roads, and I know that the NTMP program applies to neighborhood residential streetways, and then it lists in the agenda report that Boulevard's a collector street. And I'm totally for the speed getting under control, but I do want to make sure that we're consistent and see how that ties in, because I just, you know, I thought the whole thing with the neighborhood transportation was that it only went to this certain kind of road. And so perhaps we could address that in the facts and issues part, to maybe there's a history to it there that's not included.
Commissioner Myers, good catch. And talking to TPW staff today, they thought that was a really good idea to update the agenda item to reflect that. And so the Corridor Policy Committee has talked about these items as well. And so, yes, the Maycourt's classification for Boulevard is a minor collector. But I think in 1999, Mayor and Commission issued an exception for this for Boulevard. And the 2 main reasons are the low speed limit. So typically, minor collectors have a speed limit at least above 35. Boulevard does not. And the other piece is this is very residential. So in 1999, y'all considered this as an exception. That is something we should work into this agenda item, and something that's important to think about, because it is different.
I'm going to ask if we could pull it off the consent. I mean, not on consent, but I guess I want to make a comment. I am really concerned, since I've been looking more into TSPLOST, that there is a correlation between our corridor meetings. And I do have a lot of questions. I have probably more now than before. So are you saying that my questions would be addressed in our next corridor meeting? Is that?
In terms of.
In terms of-
I was just talking about how at the quarter policy committee meetings, we talked a lot about road classifications, and ACC Gov does not determine the road classifications. May
That's
Courts
what
does.
and
so-
that's what I'm finding out.
So though it might not seem like a minor collector to us in terms of May Courts and their identification, historically, they've considered this a minor collector. A lot of it's due to traffic counts and other things, as we've discussed.
Okay. So.
But definitely, we could talk about this at the
Okay,
Board of Policy
so
Committee.
we're
I mean,
back-
it's all related.
Yeah, and I guess that's where my point is. I think I'm more confused than not after as much as I'm learning, but I'm glad that Commissioner Myers brought that up.
Commissioner Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To echo some of Commissioner Myers' concerns, with a concrete example, Vine Street near where I live recently had a car accident where a car sped through and crashed and caught fire in the middle of the night. And some constituents contacted me interested in some traffic calming mechanisms along that road, but they were told by TPW that it was classified by May Courts as a collector and was not eligible for the neighborhood traffic management program, though I see kids playing out, in that area very frequently. And so I am also concerned about the consistency and application for that, since ultimately, regardless of its designation, children's lives could be at risk, and particularly concerns with an area like Boulevard, which does connect some business districts as opposed to something like Vine Street, which may be a collector, but is entirely residential. Concerns about applying this equitably across the board, no matter if your neighborhood has $400,000 houses on its street or not. And so I would agree that some update to the agenda item to reflect sort of some of the history of how this came about would be helpful, as well as perhaps, just us keeping this in mind in future as well.
Thanks, Commissioner Parker. Commissioner Hamby, then back to Commissioner Link.
Sure, thank you. And I don't know if Commissioner Link can answer this, but maybe they started this traffic study before we passed the new traffic management program, so that probably applied then. But I will say some good points have been raised about, and you know how I am, about collector and minor, whatever their arterial roads go. I mean, because certainly I could make a strong argument that Timothy Road is classified as a collector, but is very much a neighborhood street, and would love to have some traffic calming along there. So maybe what I'm asking is, at some point, if an exemption was made for Boulevard back in 1999 for that, then there ought to be opportunities afforded to other areas of the county, Vine Street, wherever else, that could be identified as minor arterials instead of collectors or whatever it's called. What would it be called, a neighborhood street or?
Collector residentials or something?
Yeah. Do you see where I'm
Arterial's
going?
the next one up, right? Yeah.
So, I don't know, Mayor, whenever there's an opportunity for us to have that discussion about some exemptions that we could apply to other streets similar to what has been applied to Boulevard, I certainly support the speed tables on Boulevard. It's a wide street and it needs them, and
Sounds like a good quarter committee assignment.
it does, doesn't it?
I'll let y'all tackle that.
We still have a job, y'all.
Commissioner Link.
I think Commissioner Hamby's getting at what I'm thinking is, this definition of collector has been thrust upon us by the state.
Yes, right.
And maybe we should make our own definitions and apply them to our NTMP, because, these are residential streets with lots of pedestrian activity, lots of bike activity. I ride my scooter down Boulevard all the time. And, plenty of people playing in the road, pets running out, whatever. So I think maybe we could take a look at our NTMP and kind of create our own, inject our own definitions into it to make sure that it properly applies to all our streets that need this kind of traffic calming.
My anticipation is that the statewide guidelines for MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, probably do some baseline definition. But then I think what we layer on top of that is very much in our purview unless we're talking about a state road. And of course, in these cases, we're not talking about a state highway like Highway 15 or 129, so.
I'd also like to see our Athens in Motion committee get involved in these kind of discussions. You know, we've got a lot of really experienced citizens on that committee who are deeply, deeply concerned about pedestrian and bike safety issues, which start with slowing down the cars.
Commissioner Thornton?
Thank you. Again, I think I'm paying more attention to it now because of TSPLOST, not because of the corridor committee. We're having so many suggestions, but when we're getting technical assistance, it's all of these rules that we're not in compliance with. So I do, not that we're just begging for extra work, but I do think that this would be in line with the corridor committee work. Because at this point, I really think that we're setting folk up for failure who even want to submit a TSPLOST proposal because they don't have, because of the way things are written now.
All right, that's good. I'm glad to make a formal assignment. All right, moving on to item 22. This regards the intersection of Hawthorne Avenue and Oglethorpe Avenue, which Transportation Public Works in their analysis has found to be the most accident-prone intersection in our community. And so there's some upgrades that are proposed here. Any input on this? Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. And my question, I guess, is the staff, if this is approved, I mean, for the preliminary plans, will we have final plans coming before us, or will that be it'll be moving forward?
So I do want to correct something. What's not in here is the need to then go forward with bids. And so we do need to adjust and put in gray shading, the need to go forward with that. So typically that's a part of this process. So what this is preliminary plans so that we can kind of move forward with that. And I think in terms of what's next, you know, the language here is to approve that bid phase for construction on this project. Right. And so that final design will come after this is preliminary. Yeah, so we're going to go bid that final design based on this agenda item.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Commissioner Link.
Yeah, so years and years ago, the other end of Hawthorne was 3 lanes and traffic calmed. But for some reason, this end was not. Is there the potential to eventually 3-lane this end of Hawthorne or consider that again? I mean, I just feel like it makes more sense to 3-lane this end than it even did the other end. I mean, is that in the cards possibly if it's up for resurfacing?
I'd have to ask staff and get back to you.
Because it seems like part of the issues with this intersection are the fact that it's going from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, and you do this little jog to get to cross Oglethorpe to the other side of Hawthorne.
And of course, for members of the public, we typically consider a lane reorientation upon, as you referenced, repaving. So
Yeah.
I think staff could get some information about when that's planned based on current repaving schedule. But this just regards the intersection improvements. So everybody okay with this on consent?
Yes.
I do want to go back and correct myself, Commissioner Denson. I did get ahead of myself. That it would be the last look at design.
Okay.
And so that, you know, we would come back with the bid information.
There'd be agenda item 2, affirm the bid.
But this will be the last. So when it goes to that a little bit more fleshed out design, that will not be coming before us after the bid process. Okay. I would like to leave this off consent then. I have gotten a couple of people just asking some specifics around some of the improvements here. And so I'll email staff to get some clarifying questions on specifics, but I'd like to leave it off consent then.
Okay, and then, you know, to follow up on the other question, we would have to do a traffic study to see if we can 3-lane it.
Commissioner Hamby?
Before we do that, can we go back to Zoom meetings? No, just, I remember that discussion years and years ago. But I also think that we had a work session on this, so there was probably some materials from that work session available,
did.
I would imagine, if I remember correctly.
Before the pandemic times.
Was it before pandemic?
It was, yeah, it seemed like it was ages ago. All right, everybody ready to move on? All right, moving on to 23, this is airport capital improvement for Taxiway A and taking advantage of some federal funds. So, any questions about this? Everybody okay with consent? Yep.
We're good.
Consent. 23. All right, 24 is a guaranteed maximum price revision to the North Oconee River Greenway Network Project 2, which is the segment that connects the southern element that connects to College Station Road with the, think of as the northern element that really connects to near Nucci Space in downtown. So questions about this?
Consent?
I'll have it on consent, but I just want to just ask a question again. The guaranteed maximum price revision, that's put into place so that it's a guaranteed maximum price, I'm assuming, in there. And so we're doing that revision because of increases in prices. Actually, I think now I'm remembering what was in there, increases in supplies and such for this project. Is that right?
That's correct. So you referenced number 6 and 7 in your questions earlier.
Yeah.
So the reference was incorrect. So we will revise that.
Okay.
at the next agenda item through the traditional strike-through and shading model. So
Okay.
another good catch, Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, well, I might not get it next month, but somehow I caught that.
With
But-
that revision, okay with consent?
Yes.
Okay. All right, item 25 is the Hickory Street property land use below the Classic Center Arena. The Classic Center Authority engaged Commissioner Lincoln, myself, for some planning guidance on this, and that's in front of us now.
Consent?
Consent.
Consent.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I just want to thank the Classic Center Authority because we did have a really good discussion about the potential for this property, including some affordable housing and some really interesting design and street-level design. So, I'm looking forward to seeing this move forward.
Consent?
Yeah, I do have a question, though,
Yeah.
on this. It's, when I was looking through the materials, it's still, the intergovernmental agreement and such still refers to the hotel being the one that's up on, what is it, on Foundry? No, what is it? The one that's up close to, yeah, it's on Foundry Street, like the little piece that was there, in the original plan. And it also still refers to the senior living center. And I think those things are both off the
Senior Living Center continues.
senior living center, and those both are not in there, but that's what I was a little bit confused, because there wasn't an adjustment. We're not making any adjustments to that, because now we would have two hotels, according to the document.
So we have a member from the Classic Center here tonight to maybe answer that question.
I don't know if Director Kramer wants to highlight that.
Sure, I think I know what you're talking about. Originally, we were talking about putting a hotel over the auto bridge that spans Foundry Street, and that is no longer going to happen. The senior condo is still in play and is being developed, yes. So this agenda report only really is speaking about the Hickory Street piece of property. And the only reason we tied it back to the IGA is you have a lot of specific guidance that you can exert upon the Classic Center Authority if we put it under that IGA that those other pieces of property came to us under. So that's why we tied it to that.
Yeah, I guess the only reason I'm asking about that was in the purpose, the request, it says approve the conveyance into the existing intergovernmental agreement. So we're not updating, we're just adding to it, we're not updating the intergovernmental agreement to strike out that hotel up at the top.
I think that was the request, yes. We weren't asking you to get rid of the transfer of property over the auto bridge. That did not work as a hotel, but it still could work as something else down the road.
So then, are we going to see a revision of this contract, the intergovernmental agreement, or are we just, and that's what I was a little bit, that I was a little confused by.
Attorney Drake?
Yes, Mr. Myers, I hope to have something out for the Classic Center Authority to look at by the end of the week. Maybe we can have it out to you beginning of the week.
Okay, so there is an actual
Yeah.
contract that we're agreeing. That's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
And I'm just curious too.
I'll highlight the changes
Changes.
in gray.
And I guess I'm just curious too, so we'll approve this on the 1st of August, but once a final project is set forth, that comes back to us, I would imagine, or not? Yeah.
Yes.
I know Paul gets tired of
Okay.
coming back to us. You might well invite you behind the rail at some point. So thank you, Paul.
All right, so 25 to consent. 26 is the intergovernmental agreement regarding the SPLOST Affordable Housing Project, and this is just the next phase of that. So, Mr. Thornton, this is in your district. Did you want to highlight any elements of this?
I want to say everything is moving really well. We're going to be going through this first phase of our demolition soon. Residents have been notified, they have been involved thus far. The goal is to not move people off the property. And there's still some edginess, there's still some with residents, but, you know, change always does that. I don't know if I could answer any questions, but Christine Davis and Robert Chester are here if there are any technical questions. But from my point of view, I see all these hands up, so I hope it's for them and not me. But yeah, we're on schedule, and that's that.
Thanks, Commissioner Thornton. Commissioner Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was looking at the agenda item, particularly, let's see, facts and issues number 7, that says that the IGA, and this is IGA number 4, right? Okay, great. Requires use of the Georgia Public Infrastructure Work Law in the procurement process. Is that a set of minimum standards with regards to procurement law, or like, are we like able to beef those up at all in that? And I bring this up because we've had some interest from members of the community that, including some agreement language that would stipulate the prevailing wages for workers in the project, or other sorts of community benefits that aren't just, you know, what the public good of having this affordable housing is for our community, but actually in the development of the housing itself, how we can benefit the workers of Athens. And so I was just curious if any of that could be included, or if it would be preempted by this Georgia Public Infrastructure Work Law. And that is a question for the attorney, I think. It's all good. No, it's fine. It's fine. I can also follow up via email. It just dawned on me. So I can say it again. Maybe I'll say it better, because I did not do a great job the first time. So members of our community are interested in public goods of this project outside of the creation of more affordable housing, extending to benefits for the workforce of Athens that could be secured through, for example, this intergovernmental or future intergovernmental agreements. With regards to prevailing wages for people working on the project, local hiring, et cetera. And so I wondered how those sorts of considerations might interact or be preempted by what's laid out in facts and issues number 7, that requires use of the Georgia Public Infrastructure Work Law in the procurement process. Yeah? Avita's ready? She's got it?
No, I understand. I think
Yeah.
that,
But I got it.
you got more to add?
Well, Attorney Drake, and then I'll turn to
Okay.
Commissioner Thornton.
Okay, go for it, Angela.
Well, I know that one thing we're doing is the disparity study, which may provide some credibility and support for doing some of the things that you're talking about doing,
Okay,
is one step.
okay.
With regards to the other items you mentioned, I might need some time to do some research on that. I remember I sent you some materials one time of some things that we did in my previous jurisdiction.
yeah.
Making bib, I think that might could work in
That was,
regards to
yeah,
that.
I need to go back to that.
And so we can revisit that together and
Okay.
come back.
would this be a relevant checkpoint to try to get some of those considerations included in an intergovernmental agreement, or would there be a future date? I don't want to delay the project at all, as Commissioner Thornton has been keeping well on top of. I mean, it's been rolling out pretty effectively, but I do think this is very important as well. And so I wondered if that research and those discussions could take place between now and August 3rd, and perhaps have some of that language included, or if that's be something we need to revisit at a later date.
I mean, couple,
Well, I think it's
Go ahead,
really
Frederick.
challenging to get that done by August 3rd.
Okay.
All of that. But I think that's an encompassing matter of its own right. I would suggest that we refer that to a committee to work on, you know.
and I'll note that this is at least a 4-phase project. So what we're talking about here, you know, is moving forward with the first phase of at least 4 phases. So there will be multiple checkpoints down the road. So that's a certainty.
Phases of construction, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, so.
And rounds of funding, because this project is relying on SPLOST dollars, a public-private partnership, Athens Housing Authority support, and federal low-income housing tax credits. And so we received a round of federal low-income housing tax credits, but future elements of the project, future slices of the pie, if you want to think about the geography that way, are going to rely on future application for those other tax credits. So should this element not have all the components included that you might seek, there will be many other coming components.
Okay. What would happen if this IGA, entering the IGA was delayed?
Delay initiation of the project.
So, delayed initiation of the project, if we push it back in the agenda cycle?
I don't know the complete range of nuts and bolts components
Yeah.
of construction. I don't know, and Christina from Columbia Group is here as well, who may be able to talk a little bit about that as she's been preparing the project. I'd certainly be glad to have her up. Hey, Christina, did you want to offer anything? Sure. And just come up to the podium so that way you can.
Mayor, while we're waiting for Christine,
Oh, yeah.
I do want to say that these conversations have been informal. I don't know who you're talking to, but I do stay in contact with Christine. And we've talked about, I always get the HOPE mixed up, the HUD program HOPE, the HOPE 3?
Section 3.
Section 3?
Section 3 and disadvantaged business
Yes.
enterprises.
And that addresses some of the concerns that you're bringing up. We've also, Christina introduced her to Marvin Nunley, who is now over the economic development at Athens Tech for training and possible jobs. So I don't know where it fits in. But now I don't know about trying to hold something up, because the innovative stuff or the interest that they've already shown trying to reach out to address these issues of making sure we hire folk, pay a livable wage, people who live in this community, give them the training. Those conversations are ongoing, and they are so progressive compared to all the other type of housing and things that we have pushed through. So I don't know if folk are interested, and I imagine, I kind of imagine who, and they are welcome to call us or call Christine or call me, because that HOPE, the Section 3 is an amazing piece of HUD that can create jobs, trainings for folk that live in and around the community. So I just want to give Christina and her staff like big kudos, because developers usually don't do that or have those kind of conversations. And I think those are the kind of things that we should be looking at all of our developers. What are they putting back into the community when they're gone?
Christina's with one of our development partners, Columbia Residential. Christina, did you want to just lend some other?
If I may.
Nick, you wanted-
We've had a conversation, Commissioner Parker, great question related to what it sounded like Davis-Bacon, prevailing wages, Section 3, Commissioner Thornton brought up. We had those conversations with Columbia already, and it sounded like in our conversations, they're prepared to do that. We are bringing this to you in a work session today because we do need to move forward with this. But I think both parties here are going to be okay, and I'll let
I
Christina
think you're
speak to
right,
that.
and so I was just going to point out that item 10, it's kind of maybe not worded as section 3, but if you read there, it says, in addition, AHA shall comply with all federal rules regarding the participation of disadvantaged businesses. So there is that component. I think what you're specifically saying is, yeah, when you hire someone, then what's the minimum wage that they're being paid? And that's a different conversation. But I would say that Columbia Residential and our partners, Jonathan Rose and AHA, have a track record of the section 3 goals that we've tracked across dozens of projects across the region, and we'd be happy to share that. And then we're self-imposing particular local hiring and disadvantaged business goals.
Could we,
And we're going to have this work session here at the conclusion of this, so, you know, if we might want to use that to dive in more, just as we get that piece.
Sure. The last thing I'll say is that, I mean, it could be good to, I think I will actually follow up via email on some of this. I would like to get some of that in writing, just to set a precedent for this body seeking out that kind of work, you know, outside of just informal conversations or conversations happening within, you know, bodies, other bodies that are, you know, bringing forward recommendations to us, if possible, especially if partners in this project are already amenable to such.
And you know, and it sounds as if there are already some documents prepared, kind of standard agreements for the Columbia group. We may want to just have those as exhibits.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
We can provide those.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Commissioner Link, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the folks staying on the property during the phase construction. I wonder if Commissioner Thornton you mentioned that so far it's looking like folks are going to be able to stay.
There was a large vacancy, well, not a large, but there was a vacancy. So instead of bringing in new renters, they left them vacant until they were ready to do that first phase.
Okay.
So that's why Christine could probably explain it better.
No.
But that's the reason why someone called and wanted to know why they were empty apartments, but they were holding them so they can begin this first phase, which is going to happen like real soon.
It depends on this body, I think, but I think in general, I would just speak to that. We tried to minimize off-site displacement. That's been talked about for about 18 months since the master planning process, et cetera. And so that's the whole reason this is a phased approach and not a massive relocation and demolition approach. And the empty units that were on the site are being, we call them turned on. So they're being renovated for reoccupancy to minimize the off-site displacement. I think at this point in time, we have 27 or 29 households that will have to be temporarily relocated off-site during this process because phase 1 does take up a large portion of the site, and we have to take down several buildings to make sure that we can accommodate phase 1 in the stormwater park. So, you know, right now, residents have been notified, those that are going to be transferring on-site. They let us know that they would prefer to be off-site. But we're still working with everyone to see what we can do to accommodate families in their different circumstances.
Christina, got Commissioner Myers and Commissioner Moore.
Yeah, I was actually just going to follow up on that question because I think it's addressed in the next agenda item with the infrastructure preliminary plans. And maybe you're going to address that later because, now that you've just mentioned that there are people saying, hey, I don't even want to move into those other apartments. I want the option to go somewhere else. Is that something you're going to talk about at all during the work session that we're going to have later on tonight?
Yes, ma'am. I'll talk about anything you have questions about.
Okay. Then we can save it
here all
till
night.
then. Okay.
Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, is attachment 1 located on another document somewhere? Or the agenda item itself has attachment 2, which is a map, but I don't actually see the IGA language on the agenda item or on our larger agenda.
That's correct. So that's what I was going to offer up, that we could get the IGA, because I think once you see the IGA and actually, like you said, the words, I think it'll be to your liking. Davis-Bacon, prevailing wages, section 3, some of that stuff.
Okay.
We'll have conversations with Columbia and make sure that the language is correct.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm not anticipating having problems with it, but I'd love to see that and incorporate some of what Commissioner Parker's talking about before. So keeping it off consent so we can actually see that IGA.
When could we anticipate having the IGA language?
We have a draft of it. Judge Sharon and I are going to meet tomorrow to talk about it, and then we're going to send it to
Columbia
and Athens Housing Authority. So we're about there, and hopefully we get it all finalized, we'll get it to you middle of next week, if not sooner. I don't think that
And while we're waiting for that agreement, some of us could do a little bit of homework and read about Section 3 and be ahead of the curve, so we don't have to break it all down to lower level. But that is a good program through HUD, and I think that it's going to be beneficial for this community.
So we've got a work session coming up on this again, so if you got some nuts and bolts questions, this is not the last time, even this evening. Moving on to 27, any questions about the infrastructure element for the public? The SPLOST dollars for this affordable housing project went to land purchase, and then they went to what's generically called the horizontal development. So that's the infrastructure, streets, stormwater, and the like. And then our private partners are involved in the buildings coming up out of the ground. And I think as Commissioner Thornton mentioned, happening relatively soon, really this winter and spring coming up. So any questions about the infrastructure piece?
No, we've got enough to read already.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to item 28. This is the LRC report regarding opportunities for local civil rights legislation modeled on the Brookhaven Ordinance and utilizing the municipal court and ACC Attorney's Office as support. And just as a statewide legislative activity note on the local level, we are one of 3 unified governments currently with this on their agenda cycle over this next couple of months. So Columbus, Muskogee, and Augusta Richmond are also in the same process. So Commissioner Wright chairs LRC, so I'll allow you to begin.
Yeah, I'll give just a little summary. I do appreciate you assigning that to our committee, and since it was 2 different years and 2 different committees, there's 7 commissioners who have been working on this project since the assignment in March. In February, we split the assignment up so that there's an educational toolkit on how to best communicate the way that this process is, a little bit of what Mr. Jones had brought forward earlier. And then there's the ordinance that's here. It came out of committee, and it's come out of committee with a commission-defined option so that I wrote down, I think it's on the definition of familiar relations is the legal version in the commission-defined option versus what came out of committee. There are additional things that need time as the commission-defined option made it into the agenda packet. I didn't have enough time to do the additional work that it needs to make sure that it's matching Brookhaven like you had asked for the assignment, as well as working with the manager's office about the best way to include the citizen committee, the Human Rights Commission or committee, so that we have that strong joint relationship about the process and make sure it's relevant. And so I'm going to work for the commission-defined option to address whether the committee part of this would be the educational tool that's been assigned to the manager versus it being used in, stated about it in the ordinance. So that's some updates that'll be happening to it between the time of this meeting. But this has a little bit of that commission-defined option that needs to be done. And I wanted it to be out so that the public had that part, and then so the discussion and the public input that we get can even bring about a better solution for our vote.
All right, so more coming on that. Commissioner Houle?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to open up some space for discussion about why we have that commission-defined option. When we discussed this in committee, there was a provision added to address polyamorous folks, essentially, in trying to make this NDO as comprehensive as possible. And while that provision only passed 3-2, the committee then voted unanimously to move the entire document as is to this body, including that. So I'm just curious why there's been a decision to move away from that between that meeting and now. Some explanation would be helpful.
So process-wise, any commissioner, even on a committee that reviewed an item can submit a CDO. So that's always available.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm inviting my colleagues to explain why they are trying to compel us to vote for this CDO instead of the original version that was passed unanimously. I mean, I support maintaining the language that's in the document as it is, so that we can provide as comprehensive of a NDO as possible.
Commissioner Parker.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that with, I guess, a procedural note. I think previously in the LRC, we have had, I think with specific reference to the lead certification requirements, that came out of committee, and there was a CDO suggested by, I think, a member of the committee. And that that ordinance actually went back to the committee as a result of that CDO coming forward. So I was wondering what is different as well about this particular instance. And if we could have some consistency perhaps with.
So the commission also can always elect to send something back to committee. That's always also an option.
Cool.
So, Commissioner Link?
I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is the primary difference between the original document that came out of committee and this CDO, and I'm trying to determine where a citizen committee falls in all of this. I feel like that is essential to this whole resolution. You know, when we passed our anti-discrimination ordinance several years ago now, the original request from the citizens was to have that portion, that Human Rights Committee that was made up of citizens who could address these claims, and we didn't pass it then. I feel like this is the opportunity to create that citizen committee to truly tackle some of these discrimination instances and to address them, you know, have them addressed by people who actually experience them and have that perspective outside of the bureaucracy of government. So yeah, I just have several questions about this. And I mean, I'd like to see a document that kind of highlights the portions that are different from the original.
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, I mean, to just clarify the difference between the original, it's all in number 6, the definition, and I'm trying to pull up the right documents. So,
I think it might be in number 7, actually,
The
in history.
no, not in the agenda
Oh,
report,
in
but
the actual-
in the
Gotcha,
ordinance.
gotcha,
It's in it's the number 6 in the definitions, and it's the definition of family. And perhaps we could, you know, have each of those read out loud to make sure we're all on the same page.
So that's the only difference between the two?
I believe so. Is that true, Commissioner Wright?
That's right. The commission-defined option that came forward with Edwards, Hamby, Thornton, and Wright, the main difference is on the first page that has a commission-defined option on it, and then this draft has page numbers on it. So on page 3 of the second draft, it's, like you said, Carol, Commissioner Myers, number 6. And when this made it into the packet on Friday, I sent everybody the detail of that was the change. And so that this definition of familial status is the legal definition versus the last-minute change that happened to this definition in LRC. So that was the highlight there. And since neither one of these ordinances has been approved, it didn't seem like it needed to have a strike-through or a highlight. You see what I mean? It's not like we're correcting a current ordinance. It's a brand-new ordinance all the way around. And
So it's the familial status definition that's the difference from one version to the other.
That's right.
Okay.
And then I think that there might be a couple other areas on here. I have to go back to my notes to make sure that they are matching the Brookhaven ordinance. And then the part that didn't get put in here from committee on either one of these options is the importance of that, the commission or committee on human rights that we want to address, if this is the time to do it. And so, Commissioner Link, I was saying that I was going to work with the manager's office to find out if that should be part of the assignment that the committee gave. You'll see it in the committee report for the manager's office to give us a work session on this toolkit, working with our Department of Equity.
Inclusion Office.
Yeah, the Inclusion Office. So that could be the best place for the committee part of this to be, or finding out if we need to sort of capture a definition or mission of a committee and put it in the ordinance on the 8th, or a commission-defined option that would come in that packet. So we didn't have time to put it in at this point, is what I'm getting at, but I think it is time for us to address it in August.
And just in terms of all things and all, choose your own adventure routes, I've certainly been very interested in the Human Rights Commission or Civil Rights Commission. Different communities frame them differently, and glad to see that move forward, either as a standalone or as a commission-defined option as a piece of this. And of course, the construction of that and responsibilities of that probably are going to take some level of engagement by this body and myself. So probably a little bit more time is necessary for that, but I'm very interested in that happening post-haste. I think I had Commissioner Hamby and then Commissioner Dents, and then I'll circle back to Commissioner Houle.
Sure. And thank you, Mayor. And I agree with what you just said about having that as part of the commission to find options, to just go ahead and get that ball rolling with that. And I will say this, I believe our attorney's office sent out an email regarding the oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this word, familial,
Yeah.
yeah. The family, you know what I'm saying.
He butchered it.
I know it. I wish I were I'm going to butcher this word now too, linguist? Is it linguist? Linguist? So, I believe y'all, I haven't looked at it yet, but I believe it does raise some concerns about the original option that was there. So I think that commission defined option helps address that.
Commissioner Dents.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I will jump on and say that I believe that is integral that we have the Human Rights or Civil Rights Commission, whatever we're going to call it, as part of this ordinance. As was brought up by residents, the process for somebody to take advantage of if they felt violated by this NDO is a very technical process. It requires you to know people in the government about how to go to it, know how processes work. And I think what a great argument for this committee be created at the same time as this ordinance going forward is that by having a handful of everyday residents that are extremely diverse and from all different backgrounds makes this taking advantage of this ordinance if somebody is discriminated against much easier. It makes quite a few more inlets where people can actually plug in if they feel like they've been violated. And I think that therefore makes this ordinance just more user-friendly. And I think that's something that's needed when you look back at what I've been calling our bar admittance ordinance, which was the kind of discrimination ordinance that we passed previously that was very narrow. It was very difficult for folks to take advantage of that, and very few people have. And so I think that shows, again, the need for this. Plus, and this, going back over this whole issue, the recommended approach for creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which was that document was put out back in 2017 and adopted by this body, and the manager's office drafted this, states that this committee should be created. And that was over 4 years ago. It is a long time coming. And also, we've been talking about, the fact that we have this on the books already in our ordinances, this disabled people's committee that has not been stood up for decades. That my talks with Manager Williams has been that Manager Williams wants to see that created again, and the best way for it to do so, and the Inclusion Office says, is through a subcommittee of this committee. So there are so many reasons why this needs to have happened 4 years ago. So at the least, we can be passing this when we pass this ordinance to make sure that it's actually effective.
I've got Commissioner Houle and then Commissioner Wright.
Yeah, so hands down, completely agree that we should be establishing a Human Rights or Human Relations Commission. Have been all about that for years and remain all about that. So I'd be happy to work on a commission-defined option with any of my colleagues who would like to use the full original language that came out of committee and add on the portion about the Human Relations Commission. I guess I remain a bit troubled by the lack of explanation here about why we have this CDO in front of us. It really is just the removal of one piece of text around the definition of family that was added into that meeting. And if we're not going to discuss why we think that's necessary here, I'm not sure when or where we're planning to do it, but 3 out of 4 of the people who signed on are in the room, and I'd love to hear that reason. The definitions that are built into this document are definitions we make to our legal document, so the idea that we can't tweak words to it is, I don't really, I mean, obviously we can tweak words to it. These are definitions we've made, so I'm just curious why some of my colleagues want to remove that piece that also acknowledges polyamorous folks.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, so the point I wanted to also bring from the agenda report here was that it was in February where the mayor, the committee asked to have the assignment split so that we have the ordinance and then working on the educational toolkit. And while we were busy, because we all felt that this non-discrimination ordinance needed to come out and to the full commission for vote and for implementation, we didn't want the time it's going to take for the implementation to hold it back. So I was just wanting to say that was a bit of the committee's want to split it, and we appreciate you splitting that. And so in the agenda packet on 8, after it talks about the ordinance, on number 7 and number 8, the Legislative Review Committee also voted unanimously to pass the examine opportunities for an educational toolkit for the local civil rights legislation portion of the topic out of committee and ask the manager's office to develop a plan in more detail to make the complaint process more accessible to be presented at a future work session and subsequent mayor and commission consideration. And so I think we all agree, and Commissioner Denson, you brought up that it is a challenge, and we had Ms. Cochran speak to us about how logistically complicated it is right now, and we want to have that addressed as soon as possible. And then this committee or commission that could be with it, I think, is an essential part of the complaint process, it be more accessible. So again, I'll work with how we want to put that forward. Be glad to work with whoever wants to work on that. And I'll get with the manager to see if they've already talked about that being part of what they're working on.
I've at least had some preliminary conversations with the manager.
Okay.
All right, so definitely more discussion. I anticipate we're not putting this on consent. All right, I'm going to move on to what's here by title only. LRC is in the midst of reviewing alcohol serving during special events, but anticipates, I understand, that may just take a single meeting to complete.
And that's Thursday. So we'll be meeting
Okay.
on Thursday. We hope to bring it forward so that we can all talk about it on the 8th, so that while these festivals are coming forward and stuff, that we can do what is being recommended. Staff and the police department have ideas already for improvements. And if it turns out to be a pilot just to get it going, perhaps that'll be what we do, but we'll talk about this on Thursday. We may, if we need to, have another LRC on the 29th, and then, but anyway, we thought it was important to move as fast as possible on that. Mr. Jones, did you have anything you wanted to ask? We welcome having you on our committee.
All right, so everybody tune into LRC. When the resolution to create a structured environment for homeless persons or unsheltered persons was passed, I was charged with putting an item on the agenda on July 20th or as soon as could reasonably be done. And so by title only, this is on the agenda for the first Tuesday vote in August. Staff, I know, has done some preliminary work based on just lots of background and research and engagement with HUD and partners, and I always want to make for the public the point that that this is not creating an Office of Homeless Services in the unified government, but instead is engaging with those organizations and persons in the community who are on the front lines every day and have been for years. And so staff's going to do some additional work, and we'll be bringing a recommendation to the commission. So, Commissioner Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering if the document with some consideration sent out to us by Manager Williams last night could, or if there's interest in that being made available to the public, just so it responds to Ms. Monteverde's, questions, like what data are we looking at, what things are we thinking about, if the public could have access to some of the information as well.
I think that'd be appropriate. It is important to note that the document is like a working document.
Sure, of course.
So we are going to go to the Homeless Coalition, other providers, this Thursday to gain input. So we're waiting to gain some input and then add some of that information into the document, but I certainly think it should be public.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're in the Google Drive era of public policy development, so it's a live doc. Commissioner Hool.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Commissioner Parker. I think it'd be great to have this for the public. This is fantastic, so thanks for putting it together. I know it's been a tight turnaround, so big thanks to staff on all of that. I am just curious, do you have a sense of when we'll actually be given a recommended site or options for sites based on the criteria that's outlined in here?
I think it really all depends on the type of input we get.
Okay.
We've kind of done preliminary work, as you all know, around site selection, and there's a lot of factors that go into it, and we want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure we hear from everyone, and that's a long way of saying not really sure, but hopefully sometime in August.
Okay. And for anyone who's watching or here, the document we've received so far kind of outlines what staff is doing to look at this and some things that have happened to date, but we still don't actually have an address or addresses identified for consideration for a vote yet. So that's what we're waiting on.
Commissioner Thornton?
And I'm really glad that you made it clear that this is not a governmental initiative. This is going to be from the community with the support of the government. I think that is a misconception that has been floating around and has brought up a lot of concerns. But I did send County Manager Blaine some video and some slides. I think a couple of the commissioners have seen it also. It's called Rethinking Homelessness. I would like for you to look at it also as you prepare for your meeting. I think that as much information we can get to make these decisions, and people are already doing some things, we don't have to always recreate the wheel. And we want to just use our best resources. So I'll send that to you also, Mr. Jones, if that's, and Josh. So that might be helpful, and it may not, but you will have it. How about that?
That's good. So you bring up a good point. I think it's important for everyone to hear that what the resident mentioned earlier about best practices, staff is certainly considering best practices. Seattle, Austin, right in our backyard in Savannah, all these municipalities, local governments have kind of gone through this issue, obviously a really sticky issue. So we really appreciate best practices and seeing what everybody else has done well and not so well.
Thank you. Commissioner Denson, then I'll circle back to others.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I greatly appreciate all the work that staff has been putting together on this evolving document. And look forward to coming. My big concern is, and we've talked this to death, but unfortunately it still requires talking, is that right now in 11 days we have the CDC's eviction moratorium is going to end, and the CDC has said that they plan on this being the last extension, so it will literally end in less than 2 weeks, and that we still don't have our eviction avoidance program, whatever we're going to call it, stood up and prepared. And I know staff was working on that, but as I look through, this the homeless encampment document, I mean, evictions are mentioned multiple times in here as why people actually become homeless. And I'm very concerned that we have not taken the steps to actually make sure that dozens, hundreds people don't become homeless in 2 weeks. So I have had conversations recently with Manager Williams over the weekend, and about, I understand that staff capacity is limited, and they've been really focused on this encampment recommendations, but I mean, I cannot, if we're talking about basically trying to, stop homelessness and people being homeless, that again, one of the best ways to do it is to make sure people don't become homeless in the first place. And so I beg of us to prioritize that and try to get that stood up. I mean, I know it's like in 11 days, I don't know if we can do this, but we passed that item as a commission months ago, and we still don't have that. And I do fear a little bit that we're not taking advantage of one of the best ways, again, that we can keep people from becoming homeless in the first place. So I guess I'll put this to staff. I mean, do we feel like we can be moving forward on that program, which we've committed to, and have something before us also at the August voting session? Because I just think we desperately need to.
Commissioner Denson, I don't know the answer to that. I can certainly circle back with staff on that. If that's the will of Mayor and Commission to have something in August, I'll do the best I can to produce.
Commissioner Parker, and then Commissioner Hool and Thornton again.
I'm looking at the proposed process and timeline laid out in the document sent out by Manager Williams. It's got, I guess tomorrow, folks are meeting with the Homeless Coalition to gain their feedback. Is that, I don't know if I've gotten any emails about that meeting. Is that, are you all looking and purposefully looking for that to be a conversation between staff and providers, or akin to our previous meeting with the coalition? Is that something that commissioners can attend?
I think the thought was for staff to interact with the Homeless Coalition and the providers. In my mind, I don't think it's wrong for commissioners to be there. So I think it's open to all who are interested, but we wanted to focus particularly with the providers and the Homeless Coalition, since, obviously they're very large stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, just reading through some of the questions that were posted in this document, I have my thoughts on them certainly, but I wouldn't want to be speaking into a vacuum void of the expertise of some of the providers who may have their own responses to things that I might think sound like a good thing for us to pursue, but that they, with their experience or synthesis of other research, might disagree with or agree with. And I think that could be a productive conversation, but with the timeline, I also, would like, we are getting notifications that people are still being evicted from encampments weekly, daily. I certainly wouldn't want to delay this by requesting any rescheduling or anything like that, because I know with like sunshine laws, if multiple commissioners were interested in attending that meeting, that then creates complication. But I'm just wondering, I guess, my bigger question is, at what point in time would it be helpful to get feedback from commissioners? That's not really spelled out on this document.
This is an opportune time.
Is it right now? All right.
Well, and what I'd say, Assistant Managers Jones and Edwards, is that, given that you've relatively recently received that initial staff work, what I would ask from staff is for a post-meeting report from the homeless providers. Would commissioners find that valuable as a tool to understand what their reaction was? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
I had Commissioner Hool.
Yeah. And piggybacking on the timeline conversation, and I think that part of this document is really helpful for kind of spelling out how we're trying to accomplish this and when. I'd just like to remind everybody of the sections at the end of the document, which I think are actually in many ways a lot of the most promising work for getting us to being a sustainable, healthier community where hopefully there are fewer people suffering homelessness. And that's the parts of the document that lay out parameters for establishing kind of a strategic plan in partnership with these organizations, and also defining protocols that our staff will take when they're receiving calls about people who are perceived to be homeless, when they're involved in evictions, whether that's ACCPD or leisure services. So I think it'd be really helpful, knowing that we have to take this a piece at a time and there's a lot being juggled at once, to also have a timeline on those portions of this resolution given to us, like when we can expect to see drafts of those protocols for how staff would go about an eviction, and when we can expect to, have our first work session on the broader strategic plan, those sorts of things. And then speaking to Commissioner Denson's point about the upcoming expiration of the eviction moratorium and the fact that, as we all know, evictions are continuing to happen even right now and have been for months because not everybody qualifies for the CDC's program. I just echo that also is a priority to try to make happen as soon as possible. And I understand that's throwing a lot at you all at the same time, but that the two kind of go hand in hand, in my view. So.
Commissioner Thornton?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand with me also, but to talk about the moratorium first, I have been in contact with Daphne Walker at DCA, trying to figure out why the money seems to have gotten stuck somewhere. The money is there. The 5 agencies that was listed on our PowerPoint presentation, I don't know if that's working. She didn't even know what was going on. There are 40 cases in the magistrate court as of last week that are there because of the moratorium. 40. They're going to be evicted, I guess, when the moratorium lifts. So that's 40 that we know is in the wings. There are 268 facing dispossessories. All of them, of course, are not for rent. But we know we have a window that we could work through if we just look at what magistrate court is managing and getting with DCA and her name is Daphne Walker, and getting some input from that. We know that is there. And I think that I'm really concerned about, I am really concerned about what July the 31st is going to look like. But that is going to be compounding what's going to happen on September the 5th if there's not anything in place with our agreement with CSX. So it seems like there's 2 things that need to be going on simultaneously, but it definitely needs something that is immediate and quick. And I think the first thing is the July the 31st deadline. The money is at DCA. I have circumvented those organizations that are supposed to be the navigators for this area, and I'm sending them directly to the Georgia Legal Services, and that's where people are getting help. But I don't know who those cases are. I don't know who those 40 cases are that's in the magistrate court, but they definitely need to be referred to Georgia Legal Services as soon as possible. It's going to, the 31st is a crucial time, but September the 5th is going to be all havoc. So I just think we need to, and I'm about like with Commissioner Hull, hate to even ask y'all to even take this on like a double duty because you're already doing so much. I totally get it. But those are, we're like in emergency mode right now. And the money's there. If the money wasn't there, that'd be different.
And of course, as Commissioner Thornton has referenced, DCA has on the order of $1 billion for rent relief that in their view could be used for eviction prevention through our Clark County Magistrate Court. So we're going to be getting an update on staff's awareness of interaction between Magistrate Court and DCA for use of those funds. And then following the gathering with the homeless service providers tomorrow, we'll be getting a report as well. All right.
And if I
Yes,
just,
one more.
I know for the Clerk of Public Information Office, I think it might be helpful to incorporate whatever update we get on the eviction prevention program into the agenda item that is also this, even though it's not what we're going to be considering for a vote necessarily, so that that update is at least there. So if we're not voting on something new related to the eviction prevention program, but we do have an update, posting that for the public to view in the same place, I think would be helpful.
We'll certainly provide an update, that's for sure.
My last question, I was wondering if the Homeless Coalition meeting is happening virtually?
So-
Or is it happening in person? In person? Okay. I was hoping maybe there could be video in addition to notes, but it's all good.
Not sure about the location just yet, but it is Thursday.
It's Thursday?
Yes, sir. Thursday.
Okay. All right.
All right. All right. Actually, staying in the housing realm and with great appreciation to the Inclusionary Zoning Task Force that includes, of course, Commissioner Parker and Commissioner Denson, as well as 2 Planning Commission members and 2 of our housing partners. Really the first action item coming out of that is also respondent to funds that were allocated in the fiscal '22 budget to do a missing middle housing study that the Athens Housing Authority will be partnering with us on. I don't know if Commissioner Parker or Commissioner Denson, either of you want to, just in brief, kind of highlight what this will be? Commissioner Denson, go right ahead.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, this came out of the committee, and I can just say really quickly that the argument for going this route was made by Matt Hall, who sits in the committee and also on the planning commission with us, in which the company that we will hopefully be going with here, Opticos, has nationally recognized expertise in identifying legal barriers and zoning codes and land use maps. Also identifying subtler economic barriers caused by zoning codes using their expertise in development industry economics. And expertise in studying the built environment and identifying neighborhoods where missing middle housing would be most compatible. And this is this organization focuses specifically on these things. Greenville, South Carolina has recently went through this process, and it's been very helpful for them to make some of their zoning code and land use changes. And so we are excited that on the committee that Athens Housing Authority also sees the usefulness in this and is willing to partner with us. I believe, although I haven't seen it here, but I believe fiscally, along with also administratively, which is fantastic. And of course, we also, in the budget we just passed last month, we added the funding in for this, so it's not any kind of big surprise. So I'm very happy for us to see move forward on this.
Great, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Parker, any?
Denson nailed it.
All right.
Nailed it.
Yeah, Commissioner
I
Hamby.
have a question. How is this different from what the planning department's already done? They did something for us, what was it, a year ago or something? Do you remember the planning commission? They sent us that big old document that talked about, you know, I don't know what, you know, I mean, there were several recommendations in there, I thought, that were worth exploring. I'm just wondering how this is different.
My understanding is that this moves from concept to execution, if you want to think about it that way, from, you know, these are generically the areas of code that are a challenge for affordable housing, to sort of micro direction of this is how you could modify the code that would allow more affordable housing.
Yeah, I would say that the chair of the committee that made a lot of those recommendations is the same individual who's actually saying that we should go ahead and move forward on this. Again, I think, as the mayor put it, this actually puts it into action and uses somebody who has the expertise to be able to take not only the planning and zoning elements, but also historical and current economic situations, and how that happens across different parts of our community, along with also infrastructure, kind of take that infrastructure element too, is like layers all three of those things and kind of scans it in I think a very precise kind of manner that we just don't have the capacity to do right now, but they can, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Item 32 is designating within our org chart a position for which there is already funding, as I understand. Is that
It's taken off.
been taken off?
Yeah, we need to
Oh,
take that off.
thank you. All right, 32.
Expect to see it next
Scratch
cycle.
that.
Expect to see it next cycle, though.
In the future.
Can we take a break?
All right, for planning and zoning, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
And then we'll go ahead and bring the screen down and join on those items.
Brad, you can set a record tonight for how quick you can go through this.
I'll do my best, Commissioner.
All right, welcome, everybody. Hope the break was good for you at home or in the chamber. We are back here at the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission agenda-setting meeting here on July 20th. We have several planning and zoning items that Planning Director Brad Griffin is going to take us through, and then a short work session that will follow that. So Brad, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for this first one.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. We've got 7 for you tonight. It's nice to be back in front of y'all again, and not virtual, so good to see everybody. First item tonight is a proposed street name change. This came through the Mayor and Commission to us and has been processed through the Planning Commission. It's now returning to you for final consideration. This is the renaming of Carriage Court to Ariel Callaway Avenue. Process just a little bit. As you all know, it started with you. We have sent notices to adjoining property owners and residences that would be affected. Planning Commission heard this at their meeting in July, and then it will ultimately come to you with public hearing for an August vote. Here you see the Carriage Court, which is the proposed street to be renamed. And with this, it's the Planning Commission recommendation was to approve. Just as a note, there were 100 affected addresses with this change if it's ultimately approved. 97 are residents of Clark Gardens, the apartment office, and then also 2 undeveloped Athens-Clarke County properties. Staff notes that there's no confusion with existing street names for service delivery, and the Planning Commission recommendation to you was a unanimous approval.
Thanks, Brad. And this is on the eastern isthmus of District 4. So
Yes, the Greenway side of District 4. If we could put this stuff on consent agenda, I would ask that we do that, but we can't. So, so this is moving forward, and part of this topic being here, I wanted to ask Mr. Mayor if we could have something assigned to committee that talks about how when we name something or rename something after a person, that we get to where we have a way to memorialize or have a little, I think Commissioner Jensen, you brought this up when you were doing your research on Lay Park. And so it seems to me that we could catch up, maybe do some committee work, and then next year have some money in the budget so that there can be a sign like where the street name change is that sort of captures the essence of the person and that sort of thing. And I think it would benefit the community to go backwards in time for places as well as stay up there. Because if we can have a memorial marker at the Moon Tree, we should have one when they're things are being named after community members. So that's, not that we can do that in all this, but I know that this community would like to have more information there, just besides, I mean, they're happy with the name change, but there's more to that.
no, and this is timely. In the next couple of months, we'll really begin planning for FY23, and so a memorialization program sounds like a great budget item. So, Commissioner Parker.
I think this came up when last we discussed this back in, I guess, June. But I have been working with the mother of Miss Callaway actually lives in my district, and we were talking recently about the initial desire to rename the street Thumpa Ave, which is colloquially what the residences area call the street. I can't remember why we couldn't do that, but she was still very insistent that we actually proceed with that if possible. And so I wanted to see, first of all, revisiting why that initial request couldn't be honored, and if it still can be, since I think there might be a perception among the public that there was a reason they couldn't, so they kind of acquiesced to this alternative when there's still a very strong desire of people in the community to have it actually named Thumpa Ave after the nickname of the woman who lost her life.
I don't know if Brad or the attorney have thoughts about that.
I don't know that I've got real specifics. I do know that it was discussed. I think there was some concern with the way the sign would be worded. If there was a need to use quotations or something with it. But I just, it originally started that way, and then it came back for reconsideration, and I believe that was based on conversations with Commissioner Wright and some of the family members or something, and the petitioner, so.
So the only thing, I couldn't, I thought that's what I remembered. The only thing was the quotation marks around something that was a moniker or like an alias as opposed to someone's government name.
It was my impression that the nickname was not going to be giving the identity of the individual readily to the community, as well as not being able to put quotation marks on our green street signs. And we also want to make sure that the ability for any street change doesn't interfere with service delivery or emergency services by having a distinct name. But you know, I don't know how to, I mean, part of this is also making sure that Google Maps is going to be updated, and once it gets changed, the carriage, I don't know how the technology part of a name change happens, but I think that there were some of the family members that I talked to were wanting the name, the given name designation to help with knowing who it was versus the nickname or moniker being the people. In the long term, there's more connectivity to the given name or the Ariel Callaway to not get away from that versus a nickname, which is they want to make sure that's part of the getting the memorial sign is to be able to elaborate more on the other details of
Well, and teasing out all things, it seems like this is where those memorial signs may be very valuable.
Right. So there's no reason why it couldn't be Fampa Avenue. And in fact, the recommendation that Commissioner Wright had with regards to the interpretive signage of like explaining who Ariel Callaway was and having that connection to perhaps her government name is something that we could still pursue while honoring like what culturally for the people who live in this neighborhood, including her mother, who doesn't live in the neighborhood anymore, but obviously cares very deeply about this issue, want to see happen with the actual street sign. I mean, is there any barrier to pursuing that at this point? I know there was public comment at the Planning Commission meeting in favor of the name change, but I wonder if it was in favor of the name change generally in honor of this person, or if it was in honor of the specific name that appears on the sign. And I don't know if you remember from the Planning Commission meeting what.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, from a standpoint, I would probably say that if there was a desire to change it, since, you know, we've sent out 100 letters to people using this name, that
Yeah.
it may be something you would want to consider sending back through.
Yeah.
So we could re-notify people and see it, you know, and that would require, you know, majority vote of this group if you wanted to change it. But, you know, with regard to the quotations, I'd have to follow up more with traffic engineering on that. Certainly happy to do that, but.
I mean, I think if it appears without quotations, probably fine, yeah. But that is kind of concerning to me. But I will follow up with some of the stakeholders and see what they like to do, because I certainly wouldn't want to delay it either, since I know they've been working really hard towards it.
Commissioner Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. And hearing all this context, that to me is really helpful. And like looking at the Planning Commission item, I see speaking against this is Capathia Callaway. Is that Ariel's mother? Aunt.
Yeah.
And was that, so I guess I am very concerned that if we have family members, and I'm guessing the speaking against was because of the name?
No. I haven't watched the Planning Commission meeting, so
okay.
I was hoping
I think I can help. I mean, it was, the speaking against, as I remember, you know, and I always hate to put words into somebody's mouth because she did speak, but I think she started off by thanking whoever changed it to the formal name instead of the nickname. Okay. She appreciated that, but her reason for not wanting to change the name of the street, which is why you see the street name changes start to change in the neighborhood, which was something the Planning Commission talked about. Her reason for being in opposition was that she did not want her niece's name associated continually with bad press, bad things happening. So unless the neighborhood who's put this much work into going about getting a street name change is willing to continue to do that good work to you know, she didn't want that name constantly associated with bad things in the press.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. And I guess my last, because I definitely hear where Commissioner Parker is coming from, especially if family members, but also the complexities of just having Thumpa on there. I mean, would like be possible to have like REL Thumpa Callaway Avenue to try to make everybody a little happy? And if we were to make that change, Brad, do you feel like that being a more minor change would still require us to send it all the way through if there was simply Thumpa was inserted into the middle of that?
I think 23 characters is the max we can get on a street blade, so
All right.
we probably
All right.
busted with that.
There's
but-
that. It's worth a
Yeah.
shot.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking of this whole issue from a historian's perspective. You know, and a street is as a historical document, or the name of a street is a historical document. And, you know, looking into the future, if someone were to be researching the area decades down the line, they could find guidance from the name on the sign, and having a nickname might not lead them anywhere. Like if they would be able to find actual records for Ariel Callaway and find out who she was. But they might not be able to find actual other historical records under her nickname. So that I can see as the reasoning for that, but I do think that it should be a common practice for us to start erecting plaques that do expand a little bit upon who these people are that we're naming streets and buildings after. And even the public artworks that we're putting up around town, they seldom have any information about who the artists are or why these artworks are erected.
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, I just want to speak to there were many, many, many people who spoke in favor of this. And I understand, Commissioner, that Parker, that you had talked with the mother, but I do want to reiterate that there were I was actually very moved by how many people made an effort to come in and speak. It wasn't just 2 or 3, it was a lot of people speaking. And Brad Griffin was exactly right. That's my memory of why the aunt spoke in opposition to it. I understand that concern. These things all take so long. I would just like to actually see it move along, and I think it could end up being confusing to all those people who came in here. Perhaps I'm being too practical. Anyway.
I mean, I will add, like
Yeah.
I saw on social media for people who live in the area, like spreading the word to their friends and neighbors to come out and speak in favor of it being renamed Thumb Avenue. And so that's just where part of where my concern comes from.
It was very moving. I mean,
Yeah.
these renaming things are just a sort of a small items, but when you go to them, like we were at that other renaming thing, you see how important it is to people.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so definitely more consideration of this.
Sure,
but
yeah,
I appreciate
yeah.
the conversation tonight, everyone, very much.
Yeah.
Brett?
Okay. Next item is an amendment to an existing R1 plan development at 115 Grand Ellen Drive. The actual parcel itself is a little less than 2/10 of an acre. It was originally part of the natural area for the South Village Townhomes PD that was approved back in the late 80s, which was for the development of, I believe, 8 townhouse condominium units on Millage Avenue. The amendment to the existing PD is to develop 1 additional 3-bedroom, single-family dwelling. You see, here's the subject property. This is a portion of what was the buffer that came out of the PD in '89 that fronts Grand Ellen, and I'll show you a little more detail on this in a minute. You can see there it is a wooded area. Most of you may remember the little strip just to the, I can get my, it's not going to come up there. The little strip just to the right of what you see there is the triangle is the piece that you all just looked at a few months ago for it was a transfer of ownership to one of the townhouse owners for use as a dog park that would stay basically natural. This was the remainder of that buffer. This was the old 89, the original PD, and if you can see up in the far right corner, and I am not getting an arrow up there anymore, but it was the set-aside buffer as part of the ultimate approval for those 8 townhouses. I was not here in the late 80s when this went through, but I think there was litigation associated with it and ultimately some direction from the courts to rezone this property. We're of the opinion from staff standpoint, there are some larger buffers that were tied into this original 80s PD and setbacks associated with the townhouses. We're of the opinion that one of the primary purposes of that buffer that was left along Grand Ellen was really the notion of building townhouses on millage in the 80s. It was to protect the residents on Grand Ellen from the townhouses. When the condominium association was created and established, the triangle that we have in front of us tonight was held onto as a separate parcel by the developer. For all these years, it has stayed a buffer, but it was a separate parcel, still within the PD, but not owned by the association. And they're now bringing it forward to try to build an additional house on Grand Ellen. So there you see the house as it would be situated on the property if this is ultimately approved. Front elevation, rear elevation. Planning Commission recommendation was to approve with some conditions, and they took some of the conditions from staff and modified. They did ask, there was a larger parking area behind the house on the original plan. They wanted it reduced to a maximum of 2 spaces because there is a third space also up towards the front off the driveway. They have done that. They wanted not only to restrict to no more than 3 bedrooms, but also no more than 2.5 bathrooms within the house. Front yard setback correction has been taken care of, and then just pointing out that there is a requirement of a approval of a sanitary sewer extension that would be required at the developer's expense as part of this construction. So the Planning Commission recommendation was a unanimous vote to approve with those conditions.
Thanks, Brad. And this is the other segment of District 4.
Last topic I need to talk about tonight. I appreciate the changes or the conditions that came from the Planning Commission, and just for those watching and those of us who haven't read the packet yet, Brad, can you tell me the conditions that the Planning Department had for it? Are you saying that they mirror pretty good with each other? What
the Planning Commission did significantly was they added the 2.5 bathroom restriction to the 3 bedroom. We had 3 bedrooms, but we did not limit bathrooms, and they asked that it be limited to no more than 2.5.
And then a little less, there's more space between the dwelling and the curb now?
Yeah, they weren't meeting their minimum front yard setback, that needed to be amended, and we picked up on that too. There was a large parking pad at the rear, and they asked that it be reduced.
Mm-hmm. And then we're gaining a sidewalk section. Is this development going to have a sidewalk to
It's
it?
be sidewalk, and I think they've committed to extend all the way out to the Millage Avenue frontage.
Okay. And that's past the personal dog park?
Yes.
It will have a sidewalk at the top part. I'm looking forward to feedback from the community and you guys on this. I mean, I tend to go with the conditions and how it's been presented to be approved with conditions, but I'll look forward to hearing what input you have or if you have more questions.
Any other input on this item?
I think the Planning Commission did an excellent job discussing it, and they debated a long time on the reduction to the 2.5 baths, so I would follow through and support their recommendation.
All right. All right, moving on to the next one.
Okay, next item is 102 Lavender Road and 6045 Jefferson Road. This is an amendment to an existing commercial general plan development. It's about 52 acres. This is the commercial portion of the Oak Grove overall plan development that we know out on Jefferson Road. The approved uses include a shopping center, multifamily, assisted living, and this all ultimately ties into the originally approved Oak Grove PD residential component. So upon completion, and we've got, I mean, we're working through the permitting phase with both the multifamily and the shopping center currently in-house within the planning department and the other associated departments. This ultimately will provide interconnection so residents within Oak Grove will be able to access all of those commercial uses without going out onto Jefferson Road. There's access to Lavender Road as well directly. When this went through in 2009 for an amendment to modify this commercial center, there was a self-imposed restriction placed on the PD that limited the signage to commercial neighborhood signage instead of commercial general. That's really what this entire PD request is about. What the applicant is asking for is consideration to be allowed to use CG standards for their sign package within the commercial instead of CN. Jefferson Road and North Lavender are currently restricted streets. Jefferson allows billboards. There are a couple of other conditions that were ultimately, let's see if I've got a plan with this. Yeah, I need to go a little further. There's the property. There's the plan, and we'll go from here. There were a couple of other conditions with the sign package that will remain in place. There is a large planted buffer required, you see there along Jefferson, which is to the bottom of the map, and then Lavender runs up to the left. Both of those have buffers. All of the retail, commercial businesses that you see individually along both of those frontages, there is a condition that does not allow any of those businesses to have wall signage that faces the street, and that condition stays in place, nor can any of them have individual freestanding ground signs along the street frontage. So you will still have a buffer. This design was intended to be kind of an internal facing design. What it does ultimately do for them is it allows, a larger wall sign package for the interior facing, for the grocery store to have on the wall of the building. And then it allows one larger entrance sign at each of the two entrances to address the businesses that are within and behind the buffer. So that really is it in a nutshell. Nothing else is changing. Planning Commission recommendation was to approve the request to allow the CG sign standards.
And this is in District 5.
Yeah, I see absolutely no problem with this. I think it makes sense. Like I said, this was self-imposed limitations. I think this puts it back in place the way it would have been for that zoning anyways. And I'm hearing nothing but excitement from the people in this area anyways for this to move forward. So I will support this.
All right, moving across the highway.
Okay, across the highway to 5090 and 5098 Old Jefferson. You all have seen this before. This is a rezone request from RS8 to an RS5 with conditions. We did receive a written request by the applicant to withdraw this item from your consideration, but it was after the legal ad had run in the paper, so ultimately you have to vote to allow the withdrawal at the public hearing. So I can go through this just really, really quickly. It's the same property that you looked at before. You had looked at some issues with sewer as well, but it was to increase from 3.8 to 6 dwellings per acre. There was a binding plan associated with it. This is the property, RS8 to RS5, and that was the proposed plan. I believe the original recommendation from Planning Commission on this one was to not approve. That was a denial. But as I said, right now we have a written request for you to formally act on at your August meeting to withdraw the rezoning from consideration.
And this is also in District 5.
Yeah. So, right, this, I've spoken with the developers and with the residents, and developers spoken to the residents too, and I think the developers want to be able to work with the community on this, and they understand that this is, this increased density is not something that the residents in this area want, and there's a lot of concerns around transportation, especially along Old Jefferson Road and how it's kind of limited in and walled in by the railroad, making some really valid traffic concerns there, along with a lot of the concerns that the planning department and the planning commission came up with. So I appreciate the residents being so engaged on this, and also with the developers being engaged and being willing to work with the residents and with us to try to make overall the housing there is something that's going to work for everyone. So I will definitely be supporting us allowing the zoning request to be pulled.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to increasing density in this area, especially considering the growth that's going on and the fact that there's a shopping center going on across the street. I understand some of the transportation safety hazards in this area. I've seen some scary things driving through this area myself. I'm wondering if there are plans for a traffic light in the vicinity or any other kind of traffic calming.
the issue with this right now is even though it lines up with Lavender directly across the street, you can't get from one point to the other because of the railroad.
Yeah.
So you ultimately have to turn and travel back down to probably Whitehead Road before you can actually cross and get out. And Old Jefferson's a very narrow road, and that was largely what the concerns of the residents were too, it's already zoned for almost 4 units an acre, which is the same as Lantern Walk, just to the north of it that it will connect with. But, if and until such time that, there was the ability to get across the railroad and there will be a signal where Lavender ties into Jefferson and as part of the shopping center, but it will do no good for this project currently because you can't get across the railroad. So, I think that was a lot of the concern.
I could see a little bit of work being done on this and making something workable, because I feel like, there is a need for this kind of, low to moderate income, single-family housing, and I like the idea of townhomes. That is a way to bring down the cost of essentially single-family housing.
All right, thanks, Brent.
Okay. Next item is a straight rezone request at 281 Rivercliff Drive and 2465 Tallahassee. This one's a little, you don't see these very often in terms of what you all are asked to consider. They're asking to rezone their property from RS25 single family to AR agricultural. Future land use amendment from single family residential to rural. And some of this is just for about 80 acres of a total property configuration of about 260 that are still zoned RS25 that they're asking to put into AR. You see here, and this is the property that was originally part of Rivercliff when it was ultimately designed and developed. This was portions that were never ultimately built. You see on the future development map, the single-family residential portion of it, they're asking to change all of that to rural. And then you see even a portion of the larger is currently zoned AR. There's still a piece of that that's RS25, and then a piece of the property immediately to the right that would go RS25. So straight rezonings, no conditions recommended by the Planning Commission, and they recommend that approval of both the future land use amendment and the zoning amendment to rezone this property to agricultural residential.
All right, and this, interestingly, is in Districts 5 and 6. And given Tim's time at the mic, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Commissioner Houle.
Well, perhaps to your chagrin, I think I need to recuse myself from discussion of this item out of an abundance of caution.
Okay, all right. Back on tap, Commissioner Denson.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, but I think as everybody can see on the map here, this abuts the Tallahassee Forest Park that is being developed. And I think this makes a lot of sense that we'd rather have green space abutting what is supposed to be a conserved nature park, not even park. I think we'll never try to use the word park there, but green space. And so I think this just basically helps that, and I appreciate that nearby landowners understand that and want to also protect this green space. So.
It's beautiful land up then on the portion under consideration as well as the adjacent. Commissioner Ham?
I was just going to say, you don't see this very, very often, as Brad mentioned, and really the folks that are leading this effort really ought to be commended for this. Nancy Stengel and Kate Blaine certainly are looking after the long-term community interest in doing this, and it's very much appreciated. So, at any rate, just thought I'd say that.
Commissioner Thorne.
And I just was whispering to Mike, wasn't this a vision or a thought of Jerry's at some point? Was he talking about that somewhere?
The Tallahassee Forest.
The Tallahassee Forest.
Enormous advocate for the forest.
Yeah.
Preservation.
Yeah, I do. I didn't know the details, but I do remember Jerry was really moving in that direction, so I definitely would like to support something like that.
And also, just to note, just a sort of plug for SPLOST, the Tallahassee Forest was paid for out of SPLOST dollars that helped us purchase that a number of years ago. So thanks, Ms. Stengel and Ms. Blaine.
And
Jerry.
And Jerry.
some giving folks, including another former commissioner over here, and another large landowner who contributed to that for us. I mean, it's been a
that's
great
right, that's
collaborative
right.
effort.
Carl. Yeah.
Commissioner Jordan, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, now, sorry, we're walking down memory lane. Go right ahead, Brad.
All right, not a problem. 295 Tallahassee Road is it's an old conditional use. This church has been on this property for many, many years. It had an original conditional use zoning on it, which is basically comparable to what we call special use today. This would have probably gone back into the 80s or at least early 90s for conditional use, but it does carry a binding plan. They're wanting to amend it by building a new sanctuary, and so it requires this process to be followed. Special use in the RS8, it's a 15-acre parcel. No need to modify the traditional neighborhood future land use, and as I mentioned, it's a new sanctuary. You see the property here. The church actually owns the larger piece just immediately to the left or to the west of the property you see here with the red outline on it. You see there just an aerial. This is immediately adjacent to our new roundabout at Tallahassee and Whitehead. You see here the proposed sanctuary addition that will come to the front. It's about a 10,000-foot sanctuary addition for the church. Requires some additional parking to be put in as well. Does ultimately, if approved, it becomes a binding plan. Planning Commission there were some issues originally with this, with traffic and working through access, ingress, and egress. The church and their designer went back and worked on this, and ultimately they had brought something that Planning Commission was ready to approve with conditions. A couple of issues here. The second there with the trees, I mean, we'll work through that in the permitting process if this is approved. They just need a few more trees around the perimeter of one of the new parking lots, or the parking lot area to be expanded, that they're not showing. Because this property is subdivided, where the red dotted line was, technically, in the property, even though they own it to the west, the next large piece, because it's zoned residential, technically they're required to put a buffer along the entire property line because it's a non-residential use abutting a residentially zoned property. Let me see if I can jump back to the map. There are some options here. One, they can combine the two properties, and if they do that, and I think that's probably what they're going to do according to their applicant, what you end up with then is you're still touching residential property even further west, but when the property line goes away on the western side, then we end up with way more natural buffer than we would ever need to meet their buffer requirements. So they don't have to plant that long run of vegetation. There still will be a required buffer along the northern side there, but that is actually adjacent to an existing single-family residence, and they realize that and will do that as part of their expansion. But that was the direction that they were going to go, and we're anticipating just a combination of the two properties to alleviate that second condition, which is why we worded the condition the way we did, just to make sure it was clear that we had the ability to do that. So anyway, with that one, it was a unanimous vote to approve with those two conditions.
All right, thanks, Brad. And this is in District 6. Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I think the Planning Commission has done a good job of assessing it, and I think seems pretty much good to go. So move on to the next one as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Brad says mine to last all the time. I never get to.
All right, moving on to District 10.
I know it, yeah, keeps me sitting here.
All right, last
End of the
one.
line.
We have an amendment to an existing commercial neighborhood plan development. This is at 155 and 305 West Park Drive. Current approval, which goes back to, I believe, the '04 was when the CNPD was put in place. At that point, the two buildings that are being proposed now for residential were both, the larger of the two was a ground floor commercial with 6 dwellings over the top, and I believe 18 total bedrooms, and then the smaller building labeled as a mixed-use building without any residential, so we're assuming retail office was what they had in mind. It was never built, and so the amendment here is to keep the two footprints in place, but to modify the mixed use to building, I believe it's 18 total condominium units are what they're being called. They are, architecturally, they are attempting to mimic the existing attached townhomes that are in place that I'll show you in a minute, but these are actually going to be flats that are stacked in terms still being looked at as a condominium type unit, but they are not traditional townhouses like some of the other ones are. Currently, it's kind of functioned for the past 15 years as kind of a rear park area for the existing residents along the street. This is what the development is known as Somerville. You see there that the square there in the middle that all of the townhouses and the other houses back up to that's surrounded by an alley. That's the property we're looking at. The building to the right that fronts Jennings Mill Road is an existing office. It was built very early under a previous zoning designation. I believe this would go all the way back to an EO designation that probably goes into the early 90s. And then the amendment led to the residential development that you see around the circle. That is the existing condition of the space that will, those parking spaces you see in front of you will become the parking on one side of the new larger of the two buildings, and then parking will be to the rear. At the end, there will be a little green space left, but between stormwater and development, most of this green space will be utilized for other purposes. It's the existing architecture of the townhouses that were built as part of the original Phase 1. You see the plan on the left. This was the plan approved in '04 of the mixed-use buildings. And then on the right, they're largely the same buildings. We're at a little larger scale on that drawing to the right, so they're going to look larger on the screen, but ultimately they are about the same size. They just don't have the commercial or office components to them anymore. And then the parking is arranged a little differently, but ultimately the big change is losing the commercial and picking up an additional 30-plus beds of residential. This is the proposed architecture for the new project. And what's going on here, and I think you've got floor plans too, is if you look across the first floor levels there, you have multiple doors. One of the, where you have the door pairs, one of them is going to go into the ground floor unit. The second one's going to go up to the upstairs unit and access it that way. But those are the elevations of the two buildings that are being requested. Planning Commission is recommending approval of the change. They appreciated the architecture, really viewed it as kind of a nice attempt at what was often called form-based code instead of just straight zoning by use with the architecture and the development. And so they recommended a unanimous approval of this amendment as presented.
Sure.
Commissioner Hamby?
Sure, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be quick here. Hey, Brad, would you mind going back to that aerial view real quick?
Sure.
I want to just make a point about this, and I'm still...
It doesn't look like this anymore.
No, it doesn't. I'm going to make that point. So I'm still... I have some discussions ongoing with some neighbors around here, but I don't know that there's going to be too big of some issues that wouldn't see this move forward. But the point I wanted to make to y'all tonight is this. If you're out in this area, if you see the top of the screen there's a church up there at the top, go drive out there, and if you're ever wondering why we need a mass grading ordinance, you'll realize that when you go out there and visit this piece of property, because all those trees that you see there now are no longer there. And I know some of you may have been copied on an email from a resident of Somerville, and that's what he's talking about. So if you have an opportunity to go out there and see that, and it was a development that was approved before any of us were on the commission, and they're just now getting around to doing it, if I'm right about that, Brad. And that was before the mass grading ordinance was in place, if I'm right about that.
It was before the mass grading. The residents and the buildings that you see built on the inside of the circle were to be duplicated on the outside of the circle and then moving all the way back towards the bypass that you see there. The other issue associated with this one is that the mass grading ordinance that is in place right now applies to single-family zone properties. This is a commercial neighborhood plan development, doesn't apply to it.
Right.
And the PD, in addition, carried some vested rights with it as well. But it is, with the exception of some edge trees that are remaining along the perimeter and a lot of trees in this lower portion of the property, it's a pretty deep ravine and swale through there, and they've managed to save their conserved canopy in those perimeter areas. The trees in the center, there are no trees in the center anymore.
And this has nothing to do with this zoning request here. I just wanted to take the opportunity to point that out for y'all to visit with it. Yes.
Oh, it's the spawn board, okay.
Is that the current legal map?
Any other input on this item?
Go out there and look at it. Thank you, Kevin.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mike. All right, that is it for the agenda setting portion. As everybody knows, we did not have a work session this month. Had we had a work session, this next item would have been on it, because staff and our partners in development of North Athens, we're going to have the screen, yes. Wanted to be able to talk through just that next phase of the North Downtown project.
You see how my friends are? You see how my friends are?
Yeah.
And we'll have with us Christina Davis from Columbia Group. We've got Charlie Glidanis from Athens Housing Authority, and our Capital Projects Director, Robert Cheshire.
Oh, he's very sweet. Yeah, no, that's not, no, I'm just embarrassed.
Shall never be without.
What is that? That's too healthy, Who bought this?
I did.
Oh, you bought healthy snacks.
You want the real healthy stuff. And all I brought was one six raspberries.
I'm trying to get home and eat some lasagna and sandwich. That's what I'm trying to do.
Who brought the candy?
I
That's up. I need to know it's not
don't need to
poison.
be eating this, but it's in front of me, folks, and
You
there's
brought-
so
you
much
brought-
in front
I
of me.
did not, but I'm like, yeah, you're talking like a guilty person.
It's Halloween,
That's
we're
guilty.
making,
Yeah.
we missed Halloween.
Somebody had the
Dance Week at
impression
Christmas.
that with us back in the chamber, it may be beneficial to, have some energy, buoy us through the evening.
Well, I'll have some energy tomorrow.
Look at that guilty smile.
I'll have some energy tomorrow.
Can I bill these calories to you?
I love Snickers.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Robert Cheshire.
Yeah, ready to go?
Yeah.
Mayor, Commission, Robert Cheshire, Director of Capital Projects, and certainly excited that SPLOST 2020, Project 02, Affordable Housing, has moved into the preliminary plan approval stage. If you recall, in March of this year, so just a couple of months ago, this body approved or accepted the North at Downtown Athens Master Plan and approved the project concept for the redevelopment area. So tonight, this presentation is about the preliminary plans for the redevelopment area in the IGA number 4, which we've already discussed a little bit. In just a minute, you've already met Christina Davis with Columbia Residential. She will do the presentation. But we also have Charlie Glidanis here with Athens Housing Authority and Buck Bacon with W&A Engineering. They can answer questions. And I know Charlie wanted to do just a brief history before he turned it over to Christina, so I'm going to give it to Charlie. Thanks.
Good evening. I just wanted to say, apologize that Rick couldn't be here tonight. The bad news is you got me. The good news, I'm going to save y'all 30 minutes. Maybe 45. Okay. And I just didn't want to do a real quick reminder. Sometimes we forget how long these things go on. We actually started working on this project back before it was a project in 2017. The Russell people came to us. Their obligations as the owner were burning off on the tax credits, and they were looking to do something. So we got with Commissioner Williams, Manager Williams, who's not here, and worked on some scenarios for different properties. In the meantime, this body, I believe, directed him to really focus on Bethel because of some of the issues there. So in early 2018, we partnered with Columbia Residential, Athens, Clark County, and the Housing Authority went together and worked on some conceptual plans, which we brought to the Mayor and Commission back in August of 2018. And I know, I'm going through this because I know some of you all weren't here back then. In October of 2018, we did feasibility analysis with y'all. In 2019, Columbia negotiated the purchase of Bethel. And if you remember, we had to wait till we got the SPLOST approved to where we can buy Bethel as the housing authority. So in February of 2020, we did IGA 1, which authorized us to do a master planning process, which we brought to you. We did an IGA number 2, I believe in October of 2020, to buy the Bethel property, which we closed on in December. And then in looks like March of 21, we did IGA 3 for design services for the infrastructure and the demolition. And the demolition is now out for bid right now. Any questions so far? So I'm going to turn it over to Christina to go ahead and do the presentation.
Good evening, and thank you again. I think Charlie has already explained how long we've been working at this, so I'm actually really excited to present some plans tonight and answer any questions you may have. We've already gone through the purpose and the agenda, so I'm going to slip through some of these slides and save us all some time. But I think that just to remind you, the project concept that was proposed is here on the screen. And the concept itself was to provide funding for the horizontal public infrastructure needed to create buildable city blocks. And we're going to walk through that. And the reason I bring this up is I wanted to make sure everybody recalls this, because this is what we've used as the guidance in the guidepost for the preliminary plan development itself. I think Charlie already did a great job of the history, so I'm not going to read this word for word, but you can see it on your screen and obviously in your handouts how long we've been working at it, and these are just some of the high levels. I think in the actual report you have further details. So again, the project concept itself that was passed, or accepted I should say, noted must-have items, highly wanted and nice to have. And that's really where we focused in on this first phase of preliminary plans, is on the must-have. Here before you in this very colorful image is the demolition of all buildings in a phased approach. That's the actual language from the concept plan. So here before you, the first component of the preliminary plan itself is this phased approach. It was looked at comprehensively. I want to direct your attention to what you see in blue. Both the land area, the existing public right-of-ways, and the buildings that are highlighted blue are part of phase 1 demolition. The remaining are to be determined their exact order, but some logic in terms of existing infrastructure serving those buildings and circulation, parking, et cetera, has been given to why you see those parceled out the way that we do, okay? Further detail on the demolition related to phase 1. This is a zoomed in approach, and really it's looking, you're kind of looking at an overlay. This is the phase 1 vertical parceled out, but what we're looking at demolishing is all the buildings to make room for the realignment of Lumpkin, a realignment of Hull and Hoyt intersection, which I'll get to in a moment, accommodation of the area for the regional stormwater and public park facility, and then area available for the phase 1 vertical parcel, which again would be ground leased in some nature to the vertical private development entity. So that's not being funded with SPLOST dollars, but that's how this first phase of demolition was designated. Here before you and in your packet would be the actual demolition plan. Hopping along briefly, the red is the demolition fencing. In conversations with residents and the user group, there was a lot of concern over making sure that bus pickup and drop-off is not disturbed during this process. And so we've taken that into consideration for the Lumpkin Street and that intersection there between the island, what's called the island, and the remaining parcel of Bethel. Additionally, we've got the playground off to the right. Why is there a red circle? That's not to be demolished, but that's really to, our team worked with W&A to identify where else on the site, because this first phase of demolition is taking out the green space in the middle. And if you go there on any evening, that's where a lot of folks are hanging out. The playground's used, and that was some concerns that we got from the user group and community advocates. So we're working to locate in an area that is flat enough, because there's a lot of topography on the site, to accommodate a playground. So that at no point in time will the Bethel residents that are staying on the property be without one on their side of the street. So the second component, or I guess maybe I'm a third from the concept plan that we picked up in the preliminary plan, is the reconfiguration, reconstruction, or extension of public streets. What you're looking at here, and which is in the preliminary plans, is that reconfiguration of the intersection of Hull and Hoyt. This was identified, I don't know, I feel like my first trip here to Athens as the most dangerous intersection. I feel like every time I've walked the site with Commissioner Avita or anybody here, I feel like I'm taking my life into my hands. So this is really taking what is an awkward angle and making it a safer one. We have met with the senior center folks to talk about making sure they continue to have access to their parking. There's a bus stop there, and we're retaining that. That was also a big feedback point from the user group, is making sure that we have safe access to that bus stop still, since obviously this is accommodating seniors. What you're also seeing here is additional parking spaces provided in what is currently the right-of-way. So we're making use of that public right-of-way still and providing some additional on-street parking. Continuing on with the realignment, this is just highlighting the streets that will be adjusted within phase one. Again, that intersection of Hull and Hoyt. And then Lumpkin is a different color because that's a temporary realignment to ensure we have access to the site during this transition. So there's a lot going on in this, but what you're seeing is underneath the existing to remain buildings at Bethel, kind of in the middle and to the right, going towards College Avenue. You're seeing, let's say, after construction of horizontal infrastructure, the park and phase one buildings, and then how the streets will somewhat be realigned around that. Clear as mud? Okay. These are some typical street sections, just to orient you. I'll pause here and see if Buck has anything to add, or if anybody has questions here. I know I've been talking quite quickly.
Questions so far?
All right, so again, this is all in your packet. This is Hull Street in a typical street section here. And I'm going to pass through these, and we can obviously revisit if folks do have questions. Okay, and then the installation of public infrastructure within this preliminary plan that is before you includes several things. There are grading plans, underground utilities that are being designed. There's new storm drains along Hull Street, widening of an inlet across Hull to accommodate stormwater, a multi-use path on Hoyt Street that is the extension of the Pulaski Creek Greenway, new sewer, water, and new storm, all in Hoyt Street. Additionally, you're going to see the stormwater park itself, which I'm going to detail in a later slide.
Christina, could you go back to that? I'm still trying to figure out how are we changing Hull and Hoyt? Is it just the angle that we're changing? I'm looking at it here.
In short, yes.
Okay.
It's a safer intersection. We're also adding some on-street public parking. along Hoyt and along Hull.
Sort of a more acute angle currently than the final version.
Yeah, but it's not that, I mean, like, you know, looking on Google here and there, it's not radically different. You're not like, okay, it's not straightening it out.
Right.
Is there going to be a full stop? There's going to be a stop sign?
There is a stop
Does that
sign.
mean that's going to be extremely different? Than,
That's half the battle, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And this is a continuation of the public infrastructure, again, just an exhibit of where we are to date. You're looking at an overlay of potential layout of vertical phasing that we use to size infrastructure needs for each buildable city block funded by public infrastructure. So the regional stormwater park itself is what you see before you here. The park itself, and Buck, please correct me if I say something incorrect here. The park itself is about 1.2 acres. There is a permanent pool of water in what you see there labeled G. Again, I don't want to walk you through every element, but I'm also happy to if that's so desired. You see the intersection again at Hull and Hoyt, realigned there. We have fire lane access in B that's necessary to get, you know, for safety, public safety. We have walking pond access so that folks can enjoy this. This is designed as a public amenity. Some of the stars you're seeing on there are public art opportunities, which have been designated in conversations with the Cultural Arts Commission. They actually joined us on our last user group call and walked through the plans with that group, and we discussed potential locations and their particular process for selection of public art.
What's a flexible lawn?
An unprogrammed space, so grassy area.
Bendy grass.
Very fancy.
Grass.
I thought it was good.
It's like straws. It's amazing.
It's actually a trampoline.
It's for yoga.
Is there opportunity for a pavilion in this area that the folks could use for?
I am glad you brought that up. So item A on here is an overlook area because right now, and it's actually, if you walk on the Bethel site at the very back of the property, there's a severe drop. This is taking advantage of what I think you all heard me say, which is water flows downhill. So in the master planning process, obviously the water wants to go here. So there's a drop there. There's an overlook plaza, but we do not have it covered for that view shed, Melissa. It's from the linear park to be able to see straight through. You can actually see the North Georgia mountains.
But I mean, like below, in the park below, is that usable area? I mean, because you've got the, is that F area on level with A, or is that below?
Oh, that's great. That is below. So the way this orders in terms of topo would be B and A on the same level. And then you're going to go down E in this playscape. So think of just something that's tactile and can be fun and played on, but not necessarily a playground. F is down a layer. And I don't know the exact, how far down is F from?
Yeah, maybe 10 or 12 feet.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if maybe F would be a good place for a small pavilion, just something that, because I know those are really popular.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can continue that in the construction documentation considerations with the user group, for sure. We'll bring it up to them.
My question is on the fire lane and exactly what that's going to look like in differentiation to the roads and how that's going to be blocked off access.
Right, yeah, so I'm going to let Buck take this. This has been a point of a lot of conversation.
Yeah, so you know, we've been coordinating with all of the departments. One of the primary departments was with the fire department and how we were going to provide fire access. The other thing we wanted to make sure we did was create an alternative trail. And so the idea with the fire lane is that the fire department needs a 20-foot wide pathway to access the rear block. But we felt like we could integrate that with the wetland park. So it's probably going to be some porous pavers.
Okay.
And so it's really going to, the presence, it's going to appear like a greenway or a walkway, a multi-use path.
That's what I was concerned about. I just didn't want it to come across
We don't want it to look like a road.
Right.
Yeah,
People are going to feel weird about sending their kids
Walk
across
with
it.
asphalt.
Without, and what about how it's going to be blocked off so that it doesn't turn into unofficial parking or access and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah, so this drawing does not show the bump outs. So there'll be a bump out at each curb that will designate it so that it looks different than the on-street parking. In terms of keeping vehicles out, that's a conversation that we'll need to explore with the fire department, because they do need to have open access. But there may be some potentials for some
breakaway or something.
breakaway bollards or
That's what I'm
something of that
thinking.
nature.
Awesome, thank you.
And so just one last point of how this is designed is that the permanent pool in G, in the event of a large rain event, and this is the extent of my civil engineering knowledge here, when it rains a lot, C will fill up, and there will be water-loving plants in C. And then when at a permanent stage, it goes back down to a permanent pool state. So there's actually these what are called aquatic shelves or bioswales there. This slide is really just to articulate the amount of public outreach that has occurred. Again, I think we've covered that a little bit already through Charlie's history. But I've been able to participate in, I think, every one of these meetings and look forward to continuing that conversation. So a lot of you participated in our year of master planning amidst a global pandemic, and we had a great planning website that became very useful. We decided to continue that, and we're moving forward with, we have the domain, it's not completely up yet because we're QAing it, but we have developed it, so we've archived the entire master planning process. That'll be its own page, and then we'll be able to provide updates directly to the public on what's happening in that format. And I think this goes over also what Charlie has started the session with, which is the IGAs themselves, IGA 1, IGA 2, and IGA 3 before you. And I think it is drafted as Judd's already pointed out, it's been drafted and circulated, and I think they'll be discussing IGA 4, which proposes the use of SPLOST dollars to fund the demolition itself, and then the design and installation of horizontal infrastructure and project management towards the goal of building those buildable city blocks there at the Bethel community and adjacent publicly owned lands. To that end, we have two items for you to review here. One is the preliminary plans that we just reviewed. We have an estimate right now. Again, Charlie mentioned we would be going out for public bid in those process. So the estimation right now is $7.5 million for the preliminary plans. And that would remain, that would be approved for use within IGA 4. So you see on the right-hand side, the 7.5 at the top. And then available for future phases of design, demolition, and construction, as well as project management, would be 10.2. And then project management fee there for all phases is a set fee to AHA of 1.3. I believe that's it from my end.
Further questions, or? Yeah, Commissioner Wu.
I guess I have two. The first was piggybacking on what Commissioner Parker was bringing up before about wages and just building that into the IGA. And I guess when we get to see a draft of that text, that would be maybe the better time to follow up to see if it's already in there. We actually received a pretty fantastic email from a local advocate who's one of our neighborhood leaders, piggybacking on a lot of things that we've heard at the mic from constituents over the past year. So I might just read what they said to kind of share that along because it resonates with what I'd love to see. But they broke it down as 4 things: prevailing wages for all workers on the project, Labor Department apprenticeship standards, local hiring percentages, and vetting contractors for having a record of facilitating fair and equitable work environments.
What was the apprenticeship standards?
They had just written here Labor Department apprenticeship standards, but they go on to further elaborate. The goal of the guidelines include training our local workforce to keep dollars circulating within our local economy, as well as employing people from specific neighborhoods and paying them prevailing wages. These types of standards would also put us in a position to receive federal funding, in that the standard would mirror language found at the national level. And so I think it's just trying to use the Labor Department's apprenticeship standards, building those in where possible. I might add also a just cause clause or something similar for termination of employees. That's always something I love to see people opt into doing, kind of is a nice counter to Georgia's at-will anti-labor laws, which is of course a voluntary thing, but would be fantastic. My question that I'm hoping you might have an answer for right now was just how will materials be recovered in demolition, if at all? Thinking from a sustainability standpoint and also in helping out organizations like Habitat for Humanity and things, is there a plan to try to recover things that can either be recycled or reused by some of those organizations?
We haven't actually talked about that in great detail, so I'd have to bring that back to the team. I would say that there is about abatement that would need to be done, so I don't know that in terms of building materials there'll be a lot. I immediately think of like there's the LBC in Atlanta or things that might take, or Habitat that might take appliances.
Cabinetry, maybe.
Yeah, fixtures,
maybe,
pipes are often
I'm sorry?
pipes, especially if they're in good
Typically,
condition.
pipes would be in the demolition contractor's bid number because they would take anything that's of value, they might take and use that to low bid because they're assuming to sell that elsewhere. I don't think cabinets at Bethel are going to be something that would be reused. I would say that there might be some attic stock we would probably hold on to so that if we have any outages existing, we would be able to reuse that on the site. But we'll look into it. I mean, I don't think that we've explored that in detail for demolition, at least.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, in talking about like labor and apprenticeship issues, could this project kind of be somewhat involved with ARP funds that are invested in those kind of programs, those kind of sustainable programs? I'm just kind of thinking outside the box on how, the multiple opportunities we have with ARP funds and this project.
Well, just thinking of a little bit of overlay, particularly pre-pandemic, although continuing some through the last year and a half, we were really engaged in workforce development conversations, with a lot of area employers, with Athens Technical College, and others to enhance the higher, at least mid or high wage workforce. I think there will be some ARP-related opportunities. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about physical activity happening in the autumn of 2021, winter, spring 2022. But I think conceptually, all of those things are things that could play into future phases of this project and other projects. So I think when we do talk about ARP at the second Tuesday of August work session, it's worth revisiting that.
Can you, well, I was just going to ask you to follow up to tie that into the earlier conversation where about what Commissioner Thornton was talking about with the training program here that we're looking at, the Section 3 training that's you were all referring to. Could you?
And I think staff could probably get some material gathered together that sort of gives a high level and then sort of deeper documentation, sort of analysis, just so you've got that available to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the discussions about staffing and workers and all that, I do think that this group is ahead of the curve as far as, and I'm sure what I know, everybody needs to know. And so if there is material that could bring people up to speed, I think that would be helpful. But definitely even, the thought of even working with Athens Technical College, has been discussed. So I guess if there's a way, Christine, if we could, I know we got to take it back to the user groups and stuff, but maybe that is one thing that could help move us forward with the commission.
Absolutely, I'm taking notes over here.
Tim?
Couple of things. As I know earlier on, you brought up the numbers that estimated who will be displaced in phase one. I believe you said 27 to 29 households. Is that what you?
Off-site. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. That will be moved off-site.
That's right.
And then you were also mentioning that some of the people who were moving on-site, some of them asked to be moved offsite?
That's correct.
So I guess what I'm wondering is like, is it look like it's kind of lined up where there's nobody who's going to, we're not going to have to move people off-site who don't already want to be moved off-site? Does it seem like that is going to line up?
So we met with every household to do what's called a household data forum, and we take in consideration of school-age children, seniors, maybe people who have a background that would have a trouble in moving off-site. And that's how the determination was made on who would remain on-site and who would be off-site. There's a process there, and I'm happy to share that. But there was a lot of collaboration on how do we make sure we don't displace anybody or create a situation where we've asked so-and-so to move off-site and we've found housing, but they're unable to for X, Y, or Z reasons. So I think that the sentiment we got was a lot of folks that just are ready for change.
Sure, it doesn't surprise me. I just wanted, obviously, the best case scenario where everybody's getting what they want. That's what I would love to see. So, and then I'll also just second all the comments made by Commissioner School, Partner Link around some of the economic ways. And I would definitely see the biggest way that we could get in there would be with some of those partnering with internships, working with Athens Tech, some of the folks they have working in certain fields to bring them in to be able to get experience that they need. I mean, I'd love for us to find that collaboration that we can do across that.
Absolutely.
And then my last thing, it probably is more to staff also along with this, but I've been looking at the FCC broadband map that they have in place. And I know we also have a SPLOST project for broadband infrastructure, and we're talking about horizontal infrastructure here. Right across the street from this, on the other side of Pulaski, fiber is available there. On this side, this entire parcel, fiber is not available. And the difference between upload speeds is drastic. And so, obviously, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to make sure that we're doing all these things at the same time. So, is there plans for us to be laying some fiber, possibly using some of the SPLOST money that we have in our broadband already that we have put there? But I don't want to see us lose an opportunity. We've been talking about downtown, and I would love to see these folks have access to high-speed internet that we're planning on giving to everybody else.
Does anybody, Christina, or maybe Buck, know if there's being at least conduit planned for fiber intrusion into this neighborhood?
I do not know that answer.
Yeah, so there would be underground conduit installed as part of construction. We haven't allocated any specifically for fiber.
I mean, we're gonna have the ground open, right? So I think that we should make this a priority to have that laid here while the ground's open.
Yeah, and just in terms of the SPLOST project, we're gonna have a broader conversation about the broadband SPLOST project coming up.
Sure.
And we're gonna be bringing more information to that, because we wanna get that moving too, so. I don't know if we could use that.
Well, maybe
funding
not
for
that
this,
funding, but or the funding obviously that we already have for this project. But again, we're gonna have the ground ripped up.
I think it makes sense.
Let's put the fiber in it while we get the ground ripped up so that we have it for this area.
We will accept the fiber.
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm sure the residents will too. Yeah.
Viva.
Talking about broadband and while the ground is open, I think we're in these last days of negotiation with Washington about infrastructure money. So that will be another dollar amount that doesn't have to take from or funds that we could use for something else if that happens, is to be able to access those dollars that are going to be directly for infrastructure. So there is some other avenues.
And art funds too. Yeah, we got a lot of baskets that we can look at.
Carol.
Question, just a scheduling question. I see in here that the demolition is going to be happening this fall, and it says in here that this, of what we're looking at here, and I think it's a horizontal, not the vertical, so is going to be completed by the winter of 2023.
I'm very glad that you brought up those distinctions. So this particular SPLOST project is interwoven in what I would consider a public-private partnership.
Right.
So sometimes those dates get confusing. The horizontal demolition, excuse me, would be occurring here this fall. The installation of public infrastructure horizontal, so the street alignments, et cetera, that we just went through for phase 1 would begin immediately following that. That's in preparation for a ground lease from AHA to a vertical development entity, single-purpose entity that would develop the affordable housing. So that ground lease would then allow for the start of the vertical construction, which really is supposed to start, based on the state's timeline, by February, I think. Might be a January date. I am doing all within my power to make that happen. But effectively in spring would start the vertical construction by the private development for the affordable housing to go vertical while the horizontal is completed.
Spring 2022.
That's right. And then the vertical piece would be done by winter 2023.
Okay, so there was some mention in here of 2023.
That's right.
And that means that, in theory, those residents who are moving out this fall could come back a year and a half later. in
Yes,
this
and I
first
thought that was a
phase.
relevant point for all of the commissioners to be aware of as the return
Yeah.
of the residents.
Yeah.
And Christina, related to sort of that point and an earlier question from Tim's, can you describe engagement with the school district about continuity of attendance for kids who are currently on site, who may be temporarily transitioning into another space and then potentially back?
Yeah, so our company, Dash and Dwell, has been in those conversations and the bus routes and such that students would still be able to be picked up at all the locations we're looking at potentially needing to move households to, that the bus pickup service would not be disrupted. So obviously there'll be communication between our Dash and Dwell company that's facilitating the relocation to make sure that's a seamless. Everybody knows where to pick up everyone.
So if you're currently a Barrow Elementary third grader, next year you'd be a Barrow Elementary fourth grader, even if you were at a different site for a year and a half.
That's correct. That was also one of the considerations.
Appreciate that very much.
Absolutely.
Jesse?
I think this might be a question for the engineers, who I guarantee know a lot more about this than me. But I hear the conversation about, like, the ground's going to be open, let's try to put the fiber in. And I'm hearing, we'll accept the fiber part, which is the expensive part, if the county can find a way to, fund it. And I guess I'm just thinking through the timeline that y'all are trying to work on, not wanting to slow that down to try to get that in there, but certainly want to take advantage of getting it in there while we can. If conduit is placed that allows space for cable to then be pulled through later, would that work so that the ground doesn't have to be torn up again, as long as just there's room in the pipes for cable to be put in later in case the funding isn't secured in time for when those pipes are being laid?
Yeah, so we would need to secure funding for the conduit itself as well. I mean, I think that's something that we need to consider. So Georgia Power, right, the power provider and the telephone provider would be installing their own conduit. A fiber optic firm would have to be acquired or discussed.
And I would just add that the SPLOST project for broadband is not funded to the degree to run fiber everywhere. So if we're gonna do that, we're gonna have to think about ARP funding, and those are discussions we're gonna wanna have sooner rather than later. You're gonna hear us bring in agenda items to really clarify the vision for broadband and where the money's gonna come from. So just wanna throw that out there.
I've largely heard about a lot of money for rural broadband, but I'm not sure how much there's money in ARP for what's, distinctly an urban center.
There's
But
another part of
there
money
is.
that they're waiting and negotiating on, that's strictly infrastructure. That's the title of it.
And the school district has an allowable
Yeah, they have,
expense for
yeah.
broadband as well. So I know that staff's been in conversation with them. I talked to CCSD staffers today, so I know they're very attuned to the collaborative possibilities with existing dollars and some potential future dollars.
So in short, money for at least the conduit has to be secured by the time the ground is open. And if money for the cable that goes in it hasn't yet been secured, let's say we're only part of the way there, money for the
Well,
cable
there's
could be
two-
secured
there's two
after and
ways
then
to
pulled
go.
through.
Well, in the past, what we've done, the utility themselves put everything in that they want. So I don't know who is doing this. I know they run it up Rocksprings and Baxter and all. Is that a contractor that works for y'all, or do they do it themselves?
I think they're not our employees.
We got 3 different contractors laying stuff all over the place that are not.
But when we.
We don't know where it is.
I mean, Charter, the phone company, electric, they all coordinate, we coordinate with them and they run it up front. So the question would be, if we want to do that, who would we contact? And from a technical standpoint, we can send a guy out there, put a bunch of pipe in the ground, but if it doesn't meet their standards and it doesn't go from where they want it to where they want it, they're gonna be back out there boring again. That make sense?
It does, yeah.
But that's a good point. It's something we'll look into.
I have one more question on the vertical stuff. Is that coming, do we see that? Do we comment on that? Or is that, like, you take care of that based on all those agreements we made beforehand? What's the process
Absolutely,
there?
yeah. So I'm happy to provide updates, but that is done by the private development and within the standards set within the master plan. And we've already been in communication with the residents in that feedback cycle. So we're through schematic design in conversation with the residents, and some of the members of the user group have participated in that as well, just to get broad feedback on the design elements and amenities. And a lot of that is also required by the state of Georgia within the allocation of tax credits that we received.
And are those, the ones that are being built in this first phase, those are all residential? They're not the ones that have?
That's correct.
Different
120
retail or publicly available space?
No, that's correct. It says 120 units of affordable or mixed income housing.
And how many units are coming down in phase 1?
77. Yes. It's late at night, I'm not sure.
Oh, you think this is late? Oh,
I've heard stories. I have heard stories.
It's getting wound up.
I should have had dinner. Okay.
Sorry, one more thing, just because I imagine you're going to run out, and you should, as soon as we wrap this up. We mentioned Habitat as one of the organizations to maybe contact to see what kind of materials they'd be looking for in demolition. And the Land Trust and Hands-On Athens are just two others I think it would be good to reach out to. All three of those organizations have been doing a lot of work with reuse of materials and could maybe just lend some insight on how to go about a demolition to get them what they most need.
Okay. What was the Land Trust
Hands-On
and-
Athens.
Hands-On. Okay.
The Land Trust and Habitat.
Quick, interesting note, just while we're wrapping here, so Hands-On's parent organization, Historic Athens, and I'll be announcing tomorrow that we'll be partnering on an internship housed there to continue the archiving of historic documents from the urban renewal period for exactly this property. And so there's going to be somebody who's making available to the public all of those original documents from the 1960s till about 1970. And hopefully some of that even gets integrated into these art components.
I was going to say, is that connected with the Cultural Arts Commission?
Will be, yes.
Okay.
All right, anything else? All right, we've talked horizontal, we've talked vertical, let's go do culinary. All right, everybody, have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Anybody?